This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 52 it seems. Right there in massive letters is Star Wars Battle for Naboo, getting the first play treatment. Remember that one? It was alright. Factor 5 did the Rogue Squadron games, and they were generally pretty solid. They're promising secrets in an exclusive chat which is magazine talk, for we gotta play it a bit before you. Next up, Pokemon Puzzle League. Yeah, that was a Tetris Attack style puzzle game, with Pokemon slapped on it. Not bad if you were into that sort of thing, and Pokemon was still massive back then obviously. They're claiming the first UK review, which is a bit of a boast. BL. Then there's Game Boy Advance, bigged up as Plus, Planet GBA, which is a bit daft. More awesome games unveiled, it says. Well, it was a big deal, the GBA, everyone was waiting for that. Plus. Smaller mentions include MAJORAS Mask. Find absolutely everything. Bit late to the party on that one, that game had been out a while, but still, a classic. Then there's Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver, Mario Party 3, and Power Rangers, all getting P+ reviews OF. Power Rangers on the N64? Crikey. Top right corner. Win! £1,000 worth of Game Boy goodies. Everyone loves a competition, don't they? And, look! Flip up your free double game guide. Freebies on the cover. Always a good shout. March 2001, £3.30, issue 52. Right then, let's see what's inside. This page is the welcome page for issue 52 of N64 Magazine, dated March 2001. It's boasting about being the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo magazine, which, back then, it probably was. It lists all the staff, including Andrea Ball as the editor, who's written a little editorial piece on the right. Andrea is talking about how everyone thinks the N64 is on its last legs, but they aren't so sure. They've apparently been getting some good news. THQ told them they are bringing Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, and Indiana Jones games to the UK, which was something to look forward to at the time. Everyone was still pretty hyped for Star Wars after Episode 1. Mark from the magazine went to the States to see Factor 5, the developers of Battle for Naboo, and they spilled the beans on the game for a first look, which is on page 20 apparently. Nintendo also announced some plans for an all-new N64 title, and it's an update to NES and SNES titles, like a Tetris-style puzzler, which sounds like it might be Dr. Mario 64 in hindsight, but who knows back then. She mentions the mag being independent, meaning they can review games properly, and not be fooled by feeble imitations, whatever that means. Below the editorial, there's a section titled, "Just Look What We've Got For You This Month," highlighting a few articles. Majora's Mask gets a big 8-page tips section, probably needed, that game was a bit cryptic at times. There's a competition to win £1,000 of Game Boy goods, which is a decent prize. Pokemon Puzzle League is getting a UK review, that was a solid puzzler if you were into Pokemon. Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver is also featured, with more 3D battles, which was a big selling point for those games. And finally they mentioned that Star Wars Battle for Naboo First Play Preview is on page 20, and there's something on Game Boy Advance with final colors revealed, which was exciting as the GBA was just around the corner and we were all eager to see what it would be like. All in all, a fairly standard welcome page hyping up the content of the magazine. This page is the contents page for issue 52 of the magazine, dated March 2001. Right at the top it's boasting about being the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. Let's see what's inside, shall we? Worse. First up is Planet 64, starting on page 8. The news desk is promising new GameCube game reveals, which is exciting stuff. Back then the GameCube was just around the corner. Then there's a coming soon section with more N64 games, obviously trying to keep the old console going strong. They've got bits on Animal Forest, we know that as Animal Crossing now. That quirky little life sim. Mega Man 64 is in there too, Capcom's Blue Bomber on the N64, not bad. And blimey, Dance Revolution even gets a mention. Mickey and pals getting jiggy with it apparently, sounds interesting. Next is N64 Arena, starting on page 36. That's the review section, UK releases rated and completed, so your usual roundup of what's out and worth a punt. Then they've got a feature on Pokemon Puzzle League, page 38, calling it a puzzling extravaganza, bit dramatic, but it was a decent puzzle game, mind. Power Rangers is on page 43, described as a ropey excuse for a game featuring those mid-90s TV heroes. Avoid is the verdict, blunt as ever. Import Arena on page 44 looks at Japanese and American games, for those of us with deeper pockets for imports. Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver is featured, new monsters and new moves. Must have been all the rage at the time. Mario Party 3 is on page 48, minigame madness at Matz's gaff, classic Mario Party silliness. Regular features at the back, N64 Magazine issue 53 preview on page 96, and N64 on page 98, some kind of reader's letters or wrap-up section by the looks of it. Oh, and right at the bottom they're revealing the Game Boy Advance, final colors, and a huge list of games ready for launch. That was a big deal back then. The GBA was going to be amazing. And that's your lot for this issue's contents. This page, page 5, is the contents for N64 Magazine, March 2001 issue. Right at the top there's Conker's Bad Fur Day, flagged as an X-rated swear-em-up, from rare bit of a warning to younger readers there, eh? There's also Future Look, on page 6, showing off new N64 games. Always good to see what's on the horizon. N64 Club 64, the reader mail section, is on page 53, and Club 64 mailbox itself is on page 54. Good for a laugh to see what the readers were on about. Then, How To, for The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask on page 58, a guide to find everything in that rather cryptic game. Probably needed that. Tips Extra, on page 66, with tips for top titles and action replay codes. Cheat codes were essential back then. Game on page 70 has new challenges for Perfect Dark and some other games. Perfect Dark still looked the business on the N64. I'm the Best, on page 74, a challenge to prove your gaming prowess. Skill Club Millennium, on page 76, if you weren't on the list you weren't getting in presumably. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic on page 79, Syringe at the Ready, sounds a bit suspect doesn't it? Directory, on page 80, advice on spending your money wisely. And subscriptions, on page 94, to complete your N64 collection. The main feature is Special Investigation, Battle for Naboo Indiana Jones on page 20. They've exclusively interviewed Factor 5, the developers of Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, and Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. Two of the big games that year, definitely worth a read. Lastly, Lost in Space, on page 90, about Japanese exclusive Ninty titles, featuring Mario in space. Could be interesting to see what those are. This page is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day. Blimey, what a game that turned out to be, eh? It's titled Conker Bad, and it's a first look at the big new N64 games. There's a massive picture of Conker in some sort of futuristic purple spaceship contraption. Below that it says N64 Future Look. Then there's a few panels of screenshots of the game. One has Conker chatting to what looks like a cute bunny-type character, with the speech bubble saying, "Oh, I don't know, Conker, you're very pretty to look at." Another panel shows a skeleton character, maybe Greg the Grim Reaper they mention, and his speech bubble says, "Whose idea was this anyway?" There's another screenshot showing a Matrix section, with Conker, and another character, looking like they're doing bullet time stuff. And lastly, a shot of Conker, with some pretty expressive facial features. The reviewer reckons the lip-syncing is spot on, and it's approaching GameCube levels, which was high praise back then, considering. On the right-hand side, there's an info burst about Conker's Bad Fur Day. It says it's from Rare, naturally, and it's a 256 megabit cart, so a proper big game for the N64. It's 1 to 4 players, no controller pack, expansion pack or transfer pack needed, but it does have Rumble Pack support, thank goodness. Release date is March 5th for the US, and TBA for the UK and Japan, which was a bit typical. Anticipation rating is 5 red dots, maxed out, so they were properly excited for it. The text of the article talks about the humor being like South Park, and how Conker curses and converses with a dung beetle. Proper mature stuff, well, for a squirrel anyway. It mentions outrageous letters to Twycross Zoo, and how it starts with a boozy night at the Cock and Plucker pub. Apparently you'll be pulling out TNT, removing boulders, and even diving into odorous excrement. Charming. It goes on about leading a bull to smash targets, and using prune juice as laxative on cows. They even mention riding a dinosaur. Sounds like a right old laugh, if a bit crude. At the bottom there's a little box saying, "Want more new games? Check out the coming soon section of Planet 64 on page 16. And it's issue 52 of N64 Magazine. So yeah, Conker's Bad Fur Day, the big one on this page, and rightly so. Proper controversial game that was, for the N64 anyway. This page focuses on Conker's Bad Fur Day. Blimey, what a game that was. It's titled Harsh But Fur, which pretty much nails it. There are a load of screenshots dotted about. One has Conker with a bomb, another a dark, Scar-like looking character, and another with Mr. Death himself. Proper dark stuff for an N64 game back then, wasn't it? Day. The article talks about how Conker isn't shy about excessive violence and swearing, which was a bit of a shocker at the time for Nintendo, known for being all family friendly and that. It mentions movie spoofs like Saving Private Ryan and The Matrix, showing off the humor was a bit more sophisticated than your usual platformer. It also goes into the multiplayer, saying it's a proper laugh with mates. They mention modes like hoverboard racing and tank battles. They reckon the single player is essentially the main event, but the multiplayer is a decent add-on, without even needing the expansion pack, which was a bonus for some. The review finishes by saying to expect an import review of Conker's Bad Fur Day in N64 Magazine next issue. Oh yes. Looking forward to that, were we not? This page of Planet 64 News Desk is all about the upcoming Nintendo GameCube, and blimey, it was exciting times back then. They're hyping up the fact that there are at least 100 games in development for the GameCube, which is quite a claim. E3 in Los Angeles is mentioned as being just around the corner, where we'd finally get to see some proper GameCube games in action. They're mentioning a few titles that were rumored or confirmed at the time, like a sequel to 1080 Degrees Snowboarding, and also Turok 4. Acclaim and Camelot, the Mario Golf and Tennis lot, were apparently working on GameCube games too. Capcom, known for their survival horror, are doing a Resident Evil 4, which at the time was a big deal. And even Disney and Lego are getting in on the act with Mickey Mouse and Lego Technic's robot games, along with Doshin the Giant, which was a bit of a weird one if I'm honest, but intriguing. There's a bit about Capcom sneakily including a GameCube controller in a screenshot from Mega Man EXE on the Game Boy Advance, which is a bit of a laugh. They made a big deal about spotting it beneath the telly on the right there, as they say. It's hardly a massive secret, is it? But hey, it's news, I suppose. They also briefly mention Microsoft's Xbox and the fact that developers were still waiting for dev kits. Apparently Nintendo were already getting ready for marketing and displays in shops, which is probably why we got that rumor about seeing a GameCube in a New York toy shop. Good times, getting hyped for the next-gen consoles. This page has got the usual shortcuts section, which is like a quick news roundup. There's a bit about some American parents complaining about a Nintendo TV advert, saying it's a bit dodgy because it shows a dad and granddad in women's clothes. Sounds a bit over the top, doesn't it? Then there's news that Nintendo are bringing more of their budget Player's Choice games to the UK, games like Donkey Kong 64, Super Smash Bros., Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Snap, and Perfect Dark. Good games all of them, especially Perfect Dark, proper classic that one is. They reckon they'll be hitting the shelves for about 30 quid, which is a decent price. Poik. And there's some guff about a hard disk add-on for the N64, called Omega. Apparently you can plug it into the cartridge slot and store loads of game data, a bit like having a proper hard drive on your PC. Sounds a bit fiddly, and I doubt many people bothered with that. The main article on this page is about brain surgery, which is all about Dr. Mario 64. Bit of a blast from the past that one, an updated version of the old NES puzzle game, Dr. Mario. They're saying it's like a Tetris clone, but with Mario characters and viruses, instead of blocks. It's got fancier graphics for the N64, naturally, and they mention something about a 3D mode like in Pokemon Puzzle League. They reckon it's out in the States in April, but typical Nintendo, they're not sure when it'll arrive in Blighty. There's a console wars bit too, and it's all doom and gloom for Sega. Apparently they're stopping making the Dreamcast console next month and will just focus on making games. Bit of a shame that the Dreamcast had some good games, if not many. And there's some swipe at the Xbox, with Forbes magazine apparently saying it's doomed. Bit harsh maybe. Finally, there's an advert for the N64 Tips helpline. You can ring them up for game help, costs £1.50 a minute mind you. They list a load of games they cover, like WWF No Mercy, The World Is Not Enough, Zelda, Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, Perfect Dark, Pokemon Snap, Mario Party 2, Mickey Speedway USA, Rush 2049, and Donkey Kong 64 again. Pretty standard games for the time, those. Open 8 AM to 11 PM, 7 days a week, so if you were really stuck on Zelda you could give them a bell, I suppose. Morty. There are a couple of screenshots, one showing Dr. Mario 64 gameplay, and another showing this chunky Omega hard disk thing plugged into an N64. Overall, just your typical magazine page from back then, full of news, previews, and the odd advert. This page in N64 Magazine is kicking off with some rumors, can you believe it? Apparently, word on the street was Nintendo was going to buy Sega for up to $2 billion. Madness! Sega, those age-old rivals. Of course, Sega quickly shut that down, demanding an apology from the New York Times, who printed the story. Mr. Yamauchi himself apparently barked that there's absolutely no chance. So yeah, that was that. Or was it? Always gets the rumor mill going, doesn't it? Next up, there's a bit about Conker's Bad Fur Day. After all that Dark and Zelda stuff, Nintendo's marketing went totally potty-mouthed with Conker. This bit talks about New Year's and Conker being hungover. They even sent out an electronic postcard for New Year's, depicting a hungover Conker by the toilet. Bit crude, Even for Conker, but it was certainly getting attention. Warrington Kabaya. Then there's a nod to Software First, a mail-order place flogging N64 games. They're saying if the bargain hunters in Club 64 can't help you find the games you want at rock-bottom prices, don't give up hope and go to Software First. They reckon they've got a widening selection of N64 titles at ridiculously attractive prices. Probably trying to shift some stock, weren't they? They're even suggesting calling them or visiting their website. Times were changing, websites were becoming a thing. Also, there's a very quick mention to turn over to page 12 for more shortcuts. Can't be bothered with that now. Moving down, we've got Game Boy cameras. Seems like there was a photography competition for UK students using the Game Boy camera. Blimey, remember that thing? They had to pick one of the 6 Game Boy Color hues and the mood associated with it, and create a photo that represented that aura. 30 finalists were in the running, for a share of £5,000. That's a decent chunk of change for students. The photos shown are Van Gogh, by Robert Thompson, and Brightness, Madness and Nudity in Waiting Room, by Daniel Moulding. Fair play to them. The judges were Lynn Cullen, from a picture editor at the Independent newspaper, Mark from a camera film manufacturer AGFA, Nintendo UK's Shelley Friend, and others. They've already done the judging by the time this magazine is out, and there's a whopping £2,500 for first prize, plus a Game Boy Color, and a collection of game carts. Money's the best prize though, let's be honest. Pout. Finally, over on the right, Nintendo Go Online. This is about Pokemon Crystal in Japan and the mobile game adapter. Pokemon Crystal was only a little bit different from Gold and Silver, but this adapter was something else. Japanese Pokemaniacs could plug their Game Boy into their mobile phones and battle and exchange data. Apparently, Nintendo's Yamauchi thought this idea would extend the Game Boy's life by letting people exchange scores, game data, and collectible electronic cards. They even got baseball pitcher Kazuhiro Sasaki to help promote it, and it rocketed to #1 in Japan and sold over 1 million copies in a few weeks. Yamauchi's world domination plans were proceeding apace, apparently. But there's a little box saying, no plans to bring the mobile game adapter to the UK. Shame that. Typical. Always missing out. There's also a little picture of a purple Game Boy Color, plugged into a phone with a Pokemon battle on screen and a small caption saying, yet another color joins the Pokemon rainbow. They were really pushing those colors, weren't they? The next page showcases some new gear for the Game Boy, not the N64 this time, but still handy for handheld gaming on the go. It's all about the Game Boy Travel Pack, a complete set of accessories from Planet Distribution for £29.99. Apparently, it's got everything you could possibly want. A rechargeable battery grip, an AC adapter, a joystick, speakers, and even a light magnifier, all in a tidy carry case. Sounds like overkill really, but they reckon the quality is top-notch, and you'll never need to buy another Game Boy Extra again. They give it a solid 89% score. Then there's the Game Boy Battery Puck from Planet Distribution again, costing £17.99. This is a battery pack in a puck shape that clips to your belt, with a retractable power lead. They reckon it's one of the handiest little things they've seen in ages, and gives you up to 25 hours of power. It gets a 90% score, which is pretty good. Next up is the handle battery and adapter from Wild Things, priced at £12.99. This seems similar to the Travel Pack's battery grip, making your Game Boy look a bit like a PlayStation controller. They say it's comfy, and comes with an AC adapter for 10 hours of juice. They prefer the battery puck for portability, but it's a decent cheaper alternative at 84%. They also review the WCW dressing up kit from Argos for £9.99. This is a bit of a laugh. It's a fake muscle chest and wrestling belt, aimed at kids I suppose, or maybe lazy adults according to the text, who want to look like they go to the gym without actually going. They only give it 79%, probably because it's a bit daft. Warrants. Then there's the Radica table tennis game for £59.99. This is one of those plug-and-play TV games, letting you play table tennis against a computer or a mate. They seem quite impressed with it and recommend it, giving it a 90% score. Remember those Radica games? Always a bit of fun, even if they were simple. Finally, they look at Snap-on Facius from Wild Things for £9.99. These are faceplates for your Game Boy, and they don't mince words saying they are pretty ugly and cheap looking. They do admit they fit well and give access to buttons, and suggest using them as templates for custom paint jobs. A low score of 83% reflects their opinion. At the bottom there's a competition to win a Game Boy Travel Pack. The question is, in which year did the world get its first taste of Game Boy? With multiple choice answers, 1989, 1988, or 1987. Entries need to be in by Friday the 23rd of March. Good luck to anyone sending in a postcard. This page from the magazine takes a trip down memory lane in the Retro World section, looking at some older arcade and NES titles. It kicks off with some sales figures, mentioning that Pokémon Stadium was top of the US charts in 2000, which isn't a massive shock, is it? Majora's Mask was also up there at number 4. Over in Japan, the N64 was apparently doing surprisingly well in December, even beating the PlayStation and Dreamcast for game sales, but the Game Boy Color was still the real king over there. Then it dives into reviews of older games. First up is Star Wars from 1987, the arcade game made by Domark. They talk about the vector graphics, which were pretty cutting edge back then, all wireframe and that. Apparently Tengen, or Atari as they were also known, put it together, and it had speakers right behind your ears to really boom at you. The controller was like KITT's steering wheel from Knight Rider, which is a bit of a laugh. Oringen. Next, it's Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES from 1988. This one's interesting because it started life as Ducky Ducky Panic in Japan. Nintendo rebranded it for the West, and it's quite different from the original Super Mario Bros., with different characters and gameplay. They reckon it was considered too hard for Western players originally, which is a bit funny as it's probably easier than the proper Japanese sequel now called Lost Levels. Apparently Western gamers had to wait for Super Mario All-Stars to play the proper hard Japanese version, which they then labeled Lost Levels. Bit of a confusing situation really. There are a couple of screenshots showing the vector graphics of Star Wars and the side-scrolling action of Super Mario Bros. 2. And of course there's a picture of a teal Game Boy Color just for a bit of visual flavor. This page is all about Pokemon, wouldn't you know it, typical for back then. It's called the Celadon Times, cheeky name, that, and it's the Pika paper. Seems like they're hyping up the next generation of Pokemon games. They're saying Nikkei, which is a serious paper in Japan, reckons Nintendo will drop 2 new Pokemon games in 2002. Blimey, that was a while off back then. Apparently these new adventures are coming to Game Boy Advance and GameCube, and will even link up using some fancy SDRAM memory cards. Sounds a bit like the Link Cable days, but maybe a bit more sophisticated. Then there's something about the Pokemon TV series finally hitting video. They're releasing the first 6 episodes over 2 volumes, called I Choose You, Pikachu, and The Mystery of Mount Moon. Classic early Ash stuff, when he was still a bit of a clueless trainer, off on his adventures with only Pikachu, going through the Moonstone story and all that. They've even got a little quiz. Which Pokemon did Ash catch first? Squirtle, Bulbasaur or Caterpie? Easy peasy that one for any proper fan in it. They're giving away video sets if you send in the answer on a postcard to N64 Magazine. Bit old school that. Looks like the closing date is the 23rd of March. Christ, that was ages ago. Good times, good times. This page is all about Animal Forest, which we now know as Animal Crossing. It's billed as Shigeru Miyamoto's latest quirky game, and they're showing off some screenshots. It's interesting to see how early it was in development. They are really pushing the communication aspect of it, saying it's all about chatting in this virtual village. There's a Q&A section explaining the gameplay is open-ended. You can do stuff like chopping trees, fishing, or just sleep all day, which sounds about right for Animal Crossing. They also mention you can save your character on a controller pack and take them to a mate's game, which was a pretty novel idea back then for console gaming. A bit like memory cards, but specifically for transferring your game data. They have an info burst table that gives you the lowdown. 1 player, needs a controller pack, and the release date is TBA for the UK and US, but March in Japan. They're definitely hyped for it, giving it a full 5-star anticipation rating. The screenshots show the post office, a snowy scene. Hang on, are those PlayStation button symbols on that signpost? Bit cheeky. They also point out the village notice board, and how even opening a door is a joy to behold, bless them. Finally, there's a shot of a letter in Japanese, with the reviewer joking they need their Japanese dictionary. Seems like they were really trying to get across the chilled-out, social vibe of the game, before we really knew what it was all about. Good times. This page is all about Mega Man 64. Looks like they're calling it, looks better than Superman. Definitely. Which is a bit of a bold statement, eh? It's a preview of the game. They're saying it's finally making the jump to 3D, which was the big thing back then, of course. They mention its support of the PlayStation's Mega Man Legends, and compare the shooting to Jet Force Gemini, and the exploration to RPGs. Always trying to slot games into boxes back then, weren't they? Worry? There's a Q&A section, addressing some questions. They're talking about differences from the PlayStation version, saying the sprawling spaces are cut down a bit, making it more condensed and exciting, hopefully. Then there's a question about the long wait. They explain the PlayStation version came out in '98, but Capcom didn't plan an N64 version at the time. Reckon it's a gesture of goodwill to Nintendo, maybe buttering them up for the GameCube. Bit cynical, but maybe true. Release date question 2. Apparently it was supposed to be out in the US in January, but arrived a touch late. Classic case of slippage, they say. And finally they ask if it's an RPG or shooter, and the answer is technically both, but weighted towards the shooter side, with RPG elements. There are screenshots, showing the weapon selection screen with the drill arm highlighted, and some gameplay shots. One with Mega Man rolling about like in Jet Force Gemini, another with some friendly looking robots, and another with a map in the corner. They point out the map is useful, which is always good to know. Then there's a little info burst box with all the details. Mega Man 64 from Capcom, 256 megabits cart size, 1 player, no controller or expansion pack. Rumble pack yes, no transfer pack. Release dates for US is now, and TBA for UK and Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red dots and a green go, which we will ignore. Overall, looks like they're cautiously optimistic about Mega Man 64, seems like a decent enough preview. This page covers 2 games, Animal Leader and Paper Mario. Leckele, Animal Leader. Blimey, it does look a bit odd, doesn't it? Square everything, apparently by design. They're saying it's by Marigal, and reminiscent of Doshin the Giant, which was a 64DD title. Remember the 64DD? Didn't really take off, did it? Anyway, Animal Leader is about evolving your beasts, starting with a pig. Apparently you eat things to evolve. They even admit it looks awful but say it plays well enough. Release dates are still to be announced for both the US and UK. See. Then there's Paper Mario, finally some English shots of this one. Bit disappointing to hear it's not coming to the UK until September, while the US is getting it now. It's described as a sequel to Super Mario RPG on the SNES, and it's all turn-based battles in a cardboard world. Sounds cute enough, and they reckon it's got a good 15 hours of gameplay in it. Apparently you get friends to join you in the game, like Boos, Goombas and Koopa Troopers. Even Peach is in it, although they say she's slightly less useless this time around. Thank goodness for that. They're hyping it up as a welcome return to Mario gameplay. We'll see about that, won't we? This page is about the upcoming Disney-themed Dance Dance Revolution game for the N64. Blimey, who'd have thought it? Apparently Mickey Mouse and his pals are invading the dance mat scene. It's called Dance Dance Revolution, Disney Mix. They mention Tetris Challenge and Mickey's Speedway USA as examples of previous Disney game crossovers, which is a bit of a stretch to compare to DDR, but alright. The reviewer seems a bit bemused by it all, noting Minnie Mouse's grotesque dance moves and being slightly creeped out by the duck triplets. They do concede that Goofy is, well, goofy. It's described as using a plastic mat that plugs into the controller port, which is pretty standard DDR stuff. They list songs like It's a Small World and Zippity Doodah as the kind of tunes you'll be stomping your feet to, which sounds interesting. They reckon it's going to cost around £80 with the mat, which is a fair whack. There's a Q&A section where they try to figure out the point of it all, suggesting it's a party game for extroverts and Dance Dance Revolution pros to show off. Someone asks about the music being slow Disney songs, but apparently the PlayStation version has rave UP Disney tunes, and even classics like Johnny B. Good and I Want You Back, whilst the N64 gets Mickey Mouse March. Right then, they also touch on the chance of a UK release, saying it's slim, even though the songs are mostly English already. There is mention of jigsaw puzzles to unlock new songs and goodies, so a bit of extra stuff to do besides dancing. The info burst box gives the facts. It's from Konami. 128 megabits cart size, 1 to 4 players, no controller, expansion, rumble or transfer packs needed. It's out now in Japan, TBA, for the US and UK, and gets a 2 out of 3's anticipation rating. Fair enough. Then, there's the Nintendo Net Daily Radar UK section, keeping us up to date on the Nintendo world. They're saying GameCube is still on track for a US release this year, but the info is a bit vague. Acclaim are apparently showing off Turok 4 inches soon, but it won't be at E3, it was just a press conference for their baseball game instead. Screenshots of Shadow Man 2 Econ coming for PS2 have been released, but Acclaim are keeping quiet about a GameCube version. Eternal Darkness might be ported to GameCube, but we're told to wait until E3. Ubisoft are expected to announce their GameCube plans, possibly including a Donald Duck game and a Rayman title. Good news for Game Boy Advance fans, it's launching in the UK in June/July, and Mario Kart Advance can be played online using the GB mobile adapter. Genius if they actually release the adapter here, that is. Worst news of the month? Conker's Bad Fur Day might not see the light of day in the UK, because Nintendo think the humour is too much. Well, that's a shame, it's meant to be quite something, though maybe a bit rude for Nintendo's usual crowd. Jess Bickham from Nintendo Channel Editor signs off wishing us a good month. Standard stuff for the time, keeping us in the loop with all the Nintendo goings on. This page is a right blast from the past, innit? We've got a proper special investigation going on here, all about Factor 5. Now Factor 5, They were the chaps behind some cracking stuff on the N64, weren't they? Right in the middle there's old Indy himself, Harrison Ford, looking a bit moody, from Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. That game, eh? Tried to do the proper Indiana Jones adventure thing on the N64. It had its moments. Some good tomb raiding, some puzzle solving, but I remember it being a bit clunky in places compared to some of the other stuff on the system. Still, Indiana Jones, you can't really go wrong, can you? Warrington moments. Up top we've got spaceships looking all fast and furious. That's a nod to their Star Wars Rogue Squadron games, of course. Factor 5, they were proper wizards at making the N64 do things you didn't think it could do, especially with those 3D graphics and all the explosions in Rogue Squadron. Those games were a real technical showcase at the time, especially the first one. Proper seat of your pants, dogfights in a galaxy far, far away. So yeah, this is a Factor 5 special investigation. Probably digging into how they made those games tick, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff on Infernal Machine and Rogue Squadron. Issue 52 of N64 Magazine, there you go. Nostalgia overload. This page takes a look at Factor 5, those clever chaps behind Rogue Squadron, and their upcoming N64 titles, Battle for Naboo and Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. It's diving into what makes their games tick, calling it the Factor 5 factor. The piece is broken down into sections like visuals, pointing out how Rogue Squadron was a looker thanks to the expansion pack, and it seems Naboo and Indy are getting the same hires treatment. Sounds talks about their MusicX development tool, which apparently helps them get crisp sound. Speech mentions they're using clever tricks to get speech into the carts, so you'll hear Indy chatting away and your co-pilot in Naboo. Cheats is a fun little section, mentioning the Luke Skywalker face cheat in Rogue Squadron, and hinting at more daft cheats in these new games, which is always a laugh, innit? There's a funny bit about a Bye-Bye Jar Jar cheat in Battle for Naboo, where you can apparently crush Jar Jar with the N64 logo. Bit of cartoon violence, but it sounds like harmless fun. Then there's an interview section called Egebrecht Speaks, with Julian Egebrecht, the president of Factor 5. He's talking about their philosophy, wanting to stay true to the movie licenses, and just make top-quality games. They want to blow people away, apparently. Sounds confident enough. The page also has screenshots, showing off how these games are shaping up visually, with bits from both Naboo and Indiana Jones games. All looks pretty polished for the N64 at the time. This page is all about Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, on the N64, and it's being billed as an investigation. They're saying it's the follow-up to Rogue Squadron and reckon it's going to be even better, which is a bold claim considering how good Rogue Squadron was back in the day. Warrington Dorcas. The article bangs on about how if you liked Rogue Squadron you'll love this, and they're saying it's got over 17 levels of blasting action. Apparently the controls are still spot on, letting you fly Naboo starfighters, gunboats and even those stat bikes. The levels sound big, with hills, lakes and old buildings. They're really pushing the atmosphere, saying it feels like you're in the film, with lots of different missions and environments. Interesting bit is they're calling it Episode 1.5, saying it fits into the story between the start and end of Episode 1. Apparently you play as a rebel type, a bit like Luke Skywalker fighting against the Trade Federation. There's a little info burst box that tells you the game's from THQ. It's a 128 meg cart, just one player, no controller pack needed, but it does use the expansion and rumble packs. Transfer pack is a no-go too. Release dates are listed as now for the US, autumn for the UK, and TBA for Japan. They've given it a pretty good anticipation rating, 4 red dots out of 5, so they must be quite impressed. There are a couple of screenshot boxes too, one showing space combat over Naboo City, and another about the snow in the game being taken from the indie game, whatever that means, maybe Indiana Jones? They've got a quote from a Julian from Factor 5, the developers, explaining the Episode 1.5 thing and the Rebel Group idea. Looks like they're really trying to capture that classic Star Wars vibe. Sounds promising, I suppose. This page delves into Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, for the N64. It's running through a few of the level designs, starting with Neimoidian Plunder, which looks like a hoverbike bit in some farmland where you're protecting your captain. Julian, the developer chap quoted, says they were going for a siege feeling, restricting you to land vehicles to make you feel a bit vulnerable with enemy ships flying about. Then there's Naboo Bayou, set in a swamp with boats and rainy weather. Julian reckons this level was initially a bit dull until they put the rain in, using weather effects they'd worked on for Indiana Jones. Clever move. Next up is Disruption of Com 4, a space battle level where you're tasked with destroying a giant satellite. Julian mentions the balance of ships being key, and they didn't want so much going on that the N64 would struggle. Fair point that. Finally, Glacial Grave is set in a freezing environment where you're taking out Trade Federation oil rigs. Julian talks about making you stick to a set route to ramp up the tension and make it feel like a long, hard slog, a right proper tweaking process he calls it. The page then moves on to Smuggler's Alliance, breaking down level 4 of the game in 6 numbered sections, guiding you through the level objectives step by step, from wiping out droids near a farmhouse to rescuing a freighter in a canyon. Standard level guide stuff, really. Oraza. There's a bit about how they went from movie to game, talking about Lucasfilm's licensing department and how they checked every detail to make sure it fit in with Star Wars lore. Julian mentions they even dug into Lucasfilm's archives for storyboards and sketches, which sounds pretty thorough. Lastly, it chats about the Starcraft available, mentioning at least 8 controllable vehicles, from Stat jet bikes to the Naboo N1 starfighter, and even the Trade Federation gunboat, which Julian seems particularly proud of due to the tricky water physics and bouncing torpedoes. He said it took ages to get right, but it felt good when they finally nailed it. Sounds like a proper labor of love, this game. This page is an investigation into Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine on the N64. Right then, another adventure game, are we? It's being described as Tomb Raider meets The Legend of Zelda, which back in the day was a pretty common comparison for these sorts of games. To be fair, everyone was chasing Lara Croft's ponytail, weren't they? They're saying the controls are based on Zelda's system, which is a smart move, that Z-targeting was pretty revolutionary at the time. Apparently Factor 5, who did Battle for Naboo on the Game Boy Color, are behind this, trying to polish things up. The article reckons the game is visually impressive, trumping both Lara and Link, which is a bold claim. They're banging on about the enemy AI too, saying they don't just stand there waiting to be whipped, which is a step up from some games at the time. Apparently they track your eye movements in-game, whatever that means. Sounds a bit fancy pants for the N64. You can apparently go in guns blazing perfect dark style, or try a more stealthy approach, using puzzles to take them out, which sounds decent enough. Julian reckons there are some nasty animals in the game as well. Lovely. There's an info burst box giving us the basics. It's coming from THQ 128 megabit cart, single player. Needs the expansion pack and rumble pack, but no controller or transfer pack needed. Out now in the States, autumn for us Brits, and Japan is TBA. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red blobs, so they're clearly quite keen. Dear Choir. Overall, it sounds like they're trying to make a proper adventure game, borrowing bits from Zelda and Tomb Raider, and hopefully not messing it up. We shall see if Indiana Jones can actually improve upon the original PC version they're hinting at. Factor 5 have got a bit to prove, haven't they? This page is all about Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. Looks like a bit of a guide section here called On the Rails, which is obviously about the minecart level. You can't have an Indiana Jones game without a minecart bit, can you? It runs through 8 steps, starting with rolling into the minecart maze and using your torch, then telling you to brake for some dodgy pipes, and finally sprinting back to the cart for more rollercoaster action. Bit of a handholder really, but back then, maybe we needed it. Watch. Then there's a section called Dungeon Building, where they're talking about how they made the game look so good on the N64. Apparently they came up with some clever tech to stream in the level detail as you went along, rather than loading the whole thing at once. They were showing off a demo to Nintendo, with the camera flying through levels. Sounds ambitious for the old N64. They even had to squeeze the graphics onto 2 CDs worth of data, which was a challenge back then for cartridge games. Below that there's a tomb raiding section, comparing Indiana Jones to Tomb Raider, I suppose. They're talking about the camera angles, saying on the PC version of Indy it was always behind you, but they went for a free-roaming camera on the N64 which caused them a few headaches in tight spots. Then they mention shooting, saying Indy is never allowed to shoot innocent people, unlike Lara Croft who is a bit less fussy. There's also a bit about collecting hidden secrets in the PC version, and bonus systems in the N64 game. Finally, they touch on driving sections, saying the Jeep sections are decent in Indy, and not just potshots at bad guys. Right at the bottom there's a tiny bit called The Man, talking about Dr. Jones himself. Apparently the movement is spot on, but Harrison Ford was too pricey for motion capture, so they used a LucasArts impersonator instead, which is probably why he sounds a bit off in the game if you ask me. This page is all about the Game Boy Advance. Blimey, that was a big moment back then, wasn't it? Seems like they're properly unveiling it in this issue. Right in the top corner it's shouting Advance Unveiled. They've got the purple one front and center, proper snazzy colour that was. Looks like they've reviewed Hello Kitty Cube Frenzy, page 30 apparently, calling it the nicest, cleanest, most inscrutably staring kitty in the whole wide world. Bit much in it? Hello Kitty's Hello Kitty. And Bionic Commandos on page 31, go go gadget guns. They're saying, seems like they're checking it out after the Dirty Dozen list they did last month. No idea what that's about. There's a competition to win £1,000 worth of Game Boy goodies. Not bad at all. And they're banging on about final color schemes, Mario Kart via the internet, which was pretty amazing at the time, and a massive new launch game. Standard magazine hype, but we were all lapping it up then. P.E. Down at the bottom it says P.L.S. and lists Mr. Driller, Game Boy version of legendary horror movie, Palpa. Must be Resident Evil or something like that, I reckon. And 102 Dalmatians Disney blockbuster on your Game Boy Color. So a bit of everything, coming to the new handheld, and the old one it seems. Issue 27, March 2001, there you go. Game Boy Advance was definitely the hot ticket then. This page kicks off with some Planet Game Boy news. They're getting all excited about the Game Boy Advance and reckon there are loads of decent titles coming out soon, more than the PlayStation 2 had at launch. Apparently bit of a dig there, Sony. They're also talking about something called the Zero Project. Seems these Italian coders, Seventh Sense, have built a game engine for the old Game Boy Color, and it's supposed to be pushing the hardware way beyond what anyone thought possible. They're aiming to get PC-style point-and-click adventures like Day of the Tentacle and Secret of Monkey Island running on the GBC. Madness? In it, they reckon the graphics are impressive for the Game Boy, and they've even got screenshots showing what looks like a technical demo. They mention Leisure Suit Larry and Stranger Things as examples of games that could be converted. Blimey K. Then there's a piece on mobile Mario Kart. Apparently Mario Kart Advance is going to have internet 4-player link-up using a mobile adapter. Imagine that, playing Mario Kart against people all over the world on your Game Boy Advance. They say it's got the same characters and courses as the N64 version. The adapter's already out in Japan because phones are cheaper and more common there, but they're hoping it'll come out in Europe too. They even point out some shy guys in a wigwam as a strange obstacle in one of the courses. Sounds like a right laugh if they can get it working properly over here. This page is shouting ready for liftoff, and it's all about the Game Boy Advance launch back in March 2001. They're on about the Japanese release and how developers are working flat out to get the launch games ready. Apparently there's going to be around 40 titles for the GBA, including 2 Mario games and some secret Namco stuff, maybe Tekken, but more likely Ridge Racer. Jackal. Nintendo is obviously leading the charge with Mario Kart Advance and Super Mario Advance, which they say is a new platform game but based on the SNES, Super Mario Bros. 2 or Bros. DX as they call it. They reckon it's a straight conversion but with extra bits and bobs. There's a release list for 2001, starting with Nintendo themselves with Mario Kart Advance, Super Mario Advance, F-Zero Advance and Golden Sun. Ray. Namco's bringing out a Museum Advance, plus Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man and a mystery title. Intriguing. Konami's got a whole load, including Castlevania, Circle of the Moon, International Superstar Soccer, YY Racing Advance, Monster Breeder, Golf Master, Mail Decute, Silent Hill, and Star Communicator. Bit of a mixed bag from Konami then, eh? Midway's predictably got the sports titles, Ready to Rumble Round 2, MLB Sluggers, NBA 2001, NFL Blitz 2002, and NHL Hits. Hudson's got Bomberman Story, Pinobi, and Momotaro Matsuri. Majesco's putting out Earthworm Jim, Pitfall Fortress, and M&M's Lost in Time. There's a game just called Napoleon, listed under Napoleon. Then there's Kuru 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 Rin with their own game, plus Game Boy Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, Horse Racing Creating Derby, Tactics Ogre Gaiden, and Magical Vacation. Iridian 3D has a rather random selection including Iridian 3D, Jelly Belly, Caesar's Palace, Aerial Aces, F-18, and Paintball. Finally, under Others there's Top Gear All Japan GT, Tweety and the Magic Jewel, I Am an Airport Controller, Digi-Communication, Pocket GT Advance, Doraemon, and Mega Man EXE. They've even got a screenshot from Super Mario Advance, looking very much like the SNES game we all know, and a picture of Mario and the gang, Peach and Toad included, all in that familiar style. Says the graphics are of SNES quality. Fantastic. Well, they wouldn't say they were rubbish, would they? Overall, seems like a decent launch lineup for the new handheld, plenty to keep us busy. The next page features a review of Hello Kitty Cube Frenzy on the Game Boy. Right then, Hello Kitty on the Game Boy, who'd have thought it? Apparently, according to the magazine here, she's a demigod in Japan. Anyway, this is from Ubisoft, and it's a puzzle game where you have to guide Hello Kitty around by placing blocks, collecting flowers and bits and bobs. Nusi. They reckon New Kid Company, the developers, have made it a bit too complicated. Apparently if you put 3 blocks of the same type next to each other, they disappear and mess up your plans. Sounds a bit fiddly if you ask me. The reviewer says it starts simple enough, but you'll be ripping your hair out before long with falling blocks. They show screenshots from different levels called things like Floral Resort, Kimono Town, and Chinese Robe, and there's little tips in boxes like link up a series of blocks to get flowers, and you need the red block to fall into that gap. There's also one about storybook mode, where the more you play, the more story you unlock. Sounds a bit basic, to be honest, but I suppose it's for the kids. They give it a 3-star rating in their ultimate buying guide, which means some problems but almost certainly good fun, so not a complete disaster then, but not amazing either. They mention New Kid County made Tom and Jerry and Tigger's Honey Hunt before, and weren't too impressed with them either, apparently. The review concludes it's a bit of a shame because it could have been a simple and addictive puzzler, but they made it too complex. Fair enough. This page is a review for Bionic Commando on the Game Boy Color. Now this is a blast from the past, isn't it? Capcom bringing back an old classic, or trying to at least, for the humble Game Boy Color. They call it a retro update, and it's true, it does feel like a bit of a throwback to their older stuff, before Street Fighter really took off and Resident Evil became a household name. They mention Ridge Racer 64, which is a bit of a random comparison, but NST did both games I suppose, and they were known for being pretty solid on the N64. Anyway, Bionic Commando here is a side-scrolling 2D game, forest levels and all that. Looks very much like your typical Game Boy platformer until you realize you can't actually jump. Instead, you've got this extendable mechanical arm, a hook, grafted onto your bloke. Bit gruesome when you think about it. Bruh. The reviewer is quite taken with the swinging mechanic, says it's liberating getting around with it. They do have a point, it was a bit different back then. Apparently it can be frustrating in places, mentioning getting dropped onto guards when trying to duck, which sounds a bit clunky. They're also wondering why Capcom never used this system again, which is a fair point, it was quite unique. There's a mention of a top-down shooting section, saying it's fun despite fiddly controls. Graphics are described as not the prettiest, which looking at these screenshots, yeah, it's no Donkey Kong Country, is it? They talk about secret levels and bonus guns, standard stuff really. Steel boots that let you kill guards by stamping on them, sounds a bit brutal for a Game Boy game. Overall they give it a 4 out of 5, saying it's good fun but short and might disappoint fans of the original arcade game who are used to faster paced action. Fair enough review really, sums it up nicely. It was a decent little game for the Game Boy Color, worth a look if you were into that sort of thing back in the day, even if it wasn't exactly groundbreaking. This page features a couple of reviews for Game Boy Color games. First up is Blade, Activision's tie to the Wesley Snipes vampire flick. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and they've given it a respectable 3 out of 5. Seems like a fairly standard affair, moving from left to right, slapping bad guys about. They mention the plot being cheesy, but that your choices actually affect the gameplay and ending, which is a bit of a surprise for a Game Boy Color title. You can upgrade your character's abilities too, like Kung Fu and sword skills, which sounds like it adds a bit of depth. Warring. Then there's Disney's Magical Racing Tour. Oh dear, only a 1 out of 5 here, ouch. They are really laying into this one, calling it a tedious pile of cack, which is pretty harsh. Sounds like yet another Disney licensed game that hasn't quite hit the mark. They're not keen on the characters, mentioning Amanda Sparkle, can't say I remember her. Apparently you're racing around, and the handling is terrible. The reviewer even suggests swapping it for Tokay, which is a bit of a burn considering Tokay is a completely different type of racing game on a different console, but you get the point, avoid this one at all costs apparently. This page features a couple of reviews for the Game Boy. First up we've got Mr. Driller from Namco, going for 25 quid. It's described as a puzzle game, and they're comparing it to Tetris and Bust-A-Move 4, which are pretty big names to be going up against. They say it's about joining colored blocks and getting chain reactions, sounds alright, but they reckon it's missing something a bit special. Apparently you're drilling down and have to get air cylinders, plus there are these X blocks. The reviewer's point is it's a bit too easy, and you don't really need to think much, just rush through it. They've given it 3 out of 5 stars, saying it's alright but puzzle addicts should stick to the classics. Then below that there's 102 Dalmatians. Puppies to the Rescue on the Game Boy Color, from Activision, also £25. Blimey, same price as Mr. Driller. This one, they're not holding back, calling it a complete waste of time and saying it's another Disney game they've had to suffer. Sounds like typical platforming fare. Jumping, scrolling, collecting and avoiding enemies. They're not impressed with the levels or backgrounds, calling them bland and uninspired. They've only given this one 2 out of 5 stars. Ouch, that's a bit harsh, but they're saying spend your money on something better. The magazine is called N64 Planet Game Boy, and it's from March 2001. This page is all about tips and cheats for your handhelds, mostly Game Boy Color by the looks of it. Right at the top there's an Ask Oak section, bless him. Someone's asking about the radio tower basement switch combo in Pokemon Gold and Silver. Classic games of the time, weren't they? Professor Oak, in his infinite wisdom, tells them 321, and then 2132 for a smoke ball. Another person, Luke McGregor, is confused about evolving Slowbro and Polyrath, bless him, thinking they evolve into something else, and Oak has to set him straight, explaining about Slowking and Politoed evolutions instead using King's Rock. Good old item evolutions, remember those? Amy Collins from Newport is asking about Togepi evolution and other happy evolutions. Yeah, Espeon and Umbreon for Eevee depending on day and night, Blissey for Chansey, Crobat for Golbat, Clefairy for Cleffa, Pikachu for Pichu and Jigglypuff for Igglybuff. All the happiness evolutions make sense. Oi. Then there's a bit on San Francisco Rush 2049 on the Game Boy Color. They reckon it's a bit of a stinker compared to the N64 version, which, to be fair, it was a bit of a downgrade, wasn't it? They've got level passwords, like MADTOWN, FATCITY, SFRISCO, GASWRKZ, SKYWAYZ, INDSTRL, NEOCHGO, and Riptide. Handy if you were stuck with that one, I suppose. May Gaya. Next up, Spider-Man on the Game Boy. Venom's giving people grief apparently, so they've given some passwords. H4BBC for Venom passwords, GVBF for Venom defeated, QCVLF for Lizard defeated, GFGN for the lab level, and S8KR6 SPIDEY for the final level. Helpful for getting past those tricky bits. Why? Then there's Aladdin, another Game Boy game. Level codes for this Disney platformer. Level 2 is 130B. Level 3 is 231B. Level 4 is 332B. Level 5 is 433B. Level 6 is 534B. Level 7 is 635B. Level 8 is 736B. Level 9 is 837B. And credits is 938B. Passwords for everything back then, weren't there? Level sir. Finally, there's a section on GB Action replay codes for Pokemon Pinball. Ball Saver, always on, infinite time, infinite balls, infinite dual Pioka kickback, bonus Mew points, all sorts of cheeky ways to cheat at pinball, and then codes to catch Mewtwo, Dragonite, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. Action replay, good old cheat devices, always made things a bit easier, didn't they? Pokemon Pinball was alright for a bit of fun on the Game Boy Color, mind you. This page is advertising a competition to win a stack of Game Boy gear. Planet Compo is giving away 30 Game Boy games, 10 action packs, and 50 link cables. The top prizes include copies of a few Game Boy Color games, Monkey Puncher, Poochie Carrot, and Kinnick's Adventure. Remember those? Quick's Adventure was alright, kind of a puzzler, Poochie Carrot was a bit of a cutesy puzzle game, and Monkey Puncher, well, it was about a monkey that punches things. Pretty straightforward. They're also chucking in action packs, which were always handy for longer battery life on your brick, and link cables for a bit of multiplayer action. To enter, you have to answer a question about Michael Jackson's chimpanzee, asking if its name was Truffles, Bubbles, or Janet. Bit of an odd question for a games mag, but alright. You had to fill out the entry form, send it off to N64 Magazine in Bath, and they were picking winners on the 21st of March. Over 50 chances to win, they were saying. Good luck with that many people entering. This page of N64 Arena magazine is all about the latest games coming out, typical stuff for these magazines back in the day. We've got a first look at Pokemon Puzzle League, Nintendo's take on the puzzle genre, with a Pokemon twist. They're pushing the Gotta Match 'em all line, of course, and it's promising a review on page 38. Then there's Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. The tagline is a bit harsh, avoid like an evil disease. Sounds like the reviewer wasn't too impressed. They're saying they'll explain why on page 43, so that's probably one to skip then, eh? Warrington Door. Below that is the Import Arena section, talking about Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver. They're hyping up the 3D battlegrounds and all the new monsters from the Gold and Silver games, which were big news at the time, especially as we had to import them. Page 44 for more on that. It's got all the usual Mario crew down there too. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Yoshi, Wario, and even Waluigi is gate-crashing the party, bless him. Briaga. Finally, Mario Party 3 is getting a mention. Another minigame bash is a fair description, isn't it? They're asking if it's worth showing your face, which sounds like they're on the fence. Page 48 if you want to know what they reckon. So yeah, a standard issue really, covering the big hitters, and a few of the maybe not so good titles coming out. This page showcases the Viewed, Rated and Completed section, explaining how N64 Magazine reviews games. It kicks off with an info burst for a game called Metroid 64, detailing things like it's from Nintendo, a hefty 256 megabits cart size, 14 players, and controller pack use. Interestingly, it says cartridge save, password save, expansion pack, and transfer pack are all a no-go, but rumble pack is alright. It was expected in April in the US, May in the UK, and November in Japan, all for £40. Bit pricey for an import back then, probably why they had the N64 Passport Compatibles logo for import games with a code. It mentions you'd need a converter cartridge for UK machines. Boiny ye. Then there's a, if you're in a hurry section breaking down the review process into pluses and minuses, if you like this, visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. Each one has a little explanation of what they are judging. They use Mickey Mouse 64 as an example review, giving it 9 for visuals, 8 for sounds and mastery, and 7 for lifespan, alongside a 90% verdict. Amazing Mario beating Mickey Mousethon, it says. Sounds like a bit of a joke review example. Mickey Mouse on the N64? Never saw that one. Below that, how N64 scores a game explains their percentage rating system. 85% and above gets a star game badge. 84% to 70% is well worth adding to your collection. 69% to 50% is perfectly playable but not special. 49% to 20% is lazily programmed, and 19% to 0% is the disaster zone. Fair enough breakdown. Finally, Team 64 Feet shows the staff with little captions. There's Andrea Ball, Judd Webb, Mark Green, Dark Mark, Geraint Evans, Paul Edwards, Alan Madrell, and Steve Jalim. Sound like a bunch of characters. They're all playing Pokemon Puzzle League, calling it Game of the Month Puzzle League, except for Mark and Alan, who are on Mario Party 3, and Dark Mark, who is on Power Rangers, and Geraint, who is on Stadium G/S. Bit of a mix. Captions are all a bit jokey, mostly about Pokemon or their looks. Seems like a fun bunch. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 52, is all about Pokemon Puzzle League. Right then, a proper puzzle game with those pocket monsters, eh? Seems they reviewed the US version a while back in issue 48. This time, it's the proper PAL release we're talking about. Apparently, the reviewer reckons picking your character, or Pokemon is a bit pointless, just changes the sounds and backgrounds. Instead of Pika Pika, you get a Bulbia. Charming. Difficulty sounds a bit random, they're saying it depends on luck and you might end up pulling your hair out. Sounds about right for a puzzle game, doesn't it? Sure. They've got screenshots dotted about showing the gameplay, you know, the block puzzles. Characters like Ash, Misty, Brock, and those pesky Team Rocket villains are all there. There's a bit about combos, apparently Jigglypuff combos stop the blocks rising, which is handy to know. The story is something about Ash rushing to Puzzle Village to prove himself, and Team Rocket are hanging around in their usual dodgy attire. Brock's storyline seems to involve boulder badges, and apparently, Pikachu would give Staryu a good kicking under normal circumstances. Right you are. You can also check out character profiles and hear their Pokemon's cries if you're into that kind of thing. Pikachu. Looking at the infoburst box, it's from Nintendo, a 128 megabit cart. 1 or 2 players, which is standard. No controller pack needed, but cartridge save is in, thankfully. No password save, expansion pack, rumble pack, or transfer pack. Out now in the US and Japan, but we in the UK get it in February. Costing £40, mind you. A bit pricey, but hey, it's Pokemon. Warrington. The main article seems to be praising the addictive gameplay despite the basic graphics. Compulsive therapy sessions, they're calling it. Bit dramatic, but I suppose puzzle games can do that to you. They mention playing the American version for 5 months already, so they must be keen. There are little bits in boxes, like Tracy showing you combo tips in Mimic Mansion. And a sarcastic comment about someone being stuck in Mimic Mansion for ages. Then another box saying the blocks look bleak but liven things up. All in all, sounds like a decent puzzle game for the N64, if you're into Pokemon and dropping blocks. Star game it is, so it must be alright. The next page is all about Pokemon Puzzle League, a cracking little puzzle game on the N64. It seems to be laying out all the different modes you can get stuck into. First up is Puzzle University, which they reckon is the hardest challenge. Sounds like you've got to clear blocks in a set number of moves, easier said than done, as they rightly point out. Orange. Then there's Stadium mode, which is for 2 players to have a right old battle, and a single player version where you take on Ash and work your way to the Grandmaster. Simple to start with, but they suggest cranking it up to hard. Marathon mode sounds like the classic endless mode where you just keep going until it gets too quick. Good for practice before you dive into the other modes apparently. Warrington. Spa service is described as a bit weird. It's got Team Rocket in drag, Jesse and James, and you've got to clear blocks to free captive Pokemon. Progressively harder, naturally. Gosh, Time Zone is about racking up points within a time limit, and they say it's surprisingly good practice. No. Professor Oak's lab is your first port of call, the tutorial basically. Step-by-step instructions to get you up to speed, which is fair enough as puzzle games can sometimes be a bit baffling at first. Mimic Mansion with Tracy sounds like another tutorial type mode where you copy his combos to learn the ropes. Takei. The bottom section, pretty as a picture, is raving about the graphics. They're saying Nintendo actually bothered to make the front end look decent for once, unlike most puzzlers. Talk about a TV-style intro and faithful character and background art. Which, yeah, it was pretty slick for the time, wasn't it? They're even banging on about the backgrounds changing and the Pokemon cheering you on. A bit much maybe, but it was a nice looking game, I'll give them that. And even the tutorials get a mention for being easy to follow. Overall, they seem pretty impressed with the whole package. This page is all about Pokemon Puzzle League, a proper head-to-head puzzler for the N64. It walks you through playing a two-player match, starting with choosing your trainer, though they reckon it makes no difference who you pick, which is probably true enough. It's all about the Pokemon sounds they make when you get combos apparently. They go through a match between Alan and Steve, showing how combos send garbage blocks to the other player to mess them up. Looks like Steve gets off to a good start, then Alan fights back with a decent combo himself. They talk about needing thumbs of speed to be good at it, which is definitely right, and mention it's got that classic Nintendo polish. They even reckon it'll keep you hooked for months, which for a good puzzle game back then, wasn't far off the mark. They compare it to Buster Move 3 and Tetris Attack on the SNES as decent puzzle games to compare it to, and they are not wrong there, those were proper games back in the day. This page is all about Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64, a proper deep dive review from back in the day. You've got Ash looking a bit serious on the left, and a big old Bulbasaur at the bottom, clearly setting the scene. It's not just a standard puzzle game apparently, or so the magazine reckons, saying it's bursting with options beyond your average block matching malarkey. They mention modes like Tournament and something called Puzzle University, which sounds properly brain-melting. There's screenshots dotted about showing in-game action, all the colourful blocks and Pokemon characters like Brock and Professor Oak popping up. They're even showing off this spa service mode, which sounds a bit cheeky, involving setting Pokemon free. Goodness knows what that's all about, probably just a bit of fun. The review itself is broken down into pluses and minuses. The good stuff is the presentation, how addictive it is, challenging gameplay, and a decent two-player mode, plus loads of options. On the downside, they say it might not grab non-puzzle fans, and you'll need a mate to get the most out of it. Which, to be fair, puzzle games are always better with a bit of competition, aren't they? They're recommending Buster Move 3 if you like this, which was another decent puzzler on the N64, so fair enough, shout out. Then they've given it ratings, 8 for visuals and sounds, 5 for mastery, bit harsh maybe, but they reckon the N64 can do better, and 8 for lifespan, saying it gets properly tough later on. Overall verdict is a solid 89%, calling it the finest puzzler on the N64. High praise indeed. Looking back, Pokemon Puzzle League was a good one, proper addictive. It was a bit different mixing Pokemon with panel-to-pong gameplay, but it worked well. Puzzle games were always solid on the N64 for a quick blast, and this one had that Pokemon charm, so yeah, 89% sounds about right. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine is having a right go at Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. It's headlined, as expertly crafted as the TV show, which, reading the rest of it, is clearly taking the mickey. Apparently THQ tried to sneak this one out, without sending review copies. Always a bad sign that, isn't it? The info burst box tells us it's a 96 megabits cart, 1 or 2 players, uses a controller pack but no rumble or expansion, none of that fancy stuff. Cartridge and password saves are out too. It was out now in the UK and US, but Japan was still to be decided, and it cost a hefty £40 at the time. Looking at the screenshots, they've got captions like, "That's a nuclear spill on the left there, just rubbish," and "It's the attack of the poorly animated wasp men, run away." Doesn't sound promising, does it? They're complaining about the camera angles, the graphics being worse than Superman on the 64, and driving sections that take forever. There's a section called Dower Rangers, 3 reasons why Power Rangers must die. Drive is basically driving left to right on a dull level, rescuing inanimate hostages, dodging jerky enemy ships like something from an 80s arcade game. Fight is about rubbish first-person battles against a massive Megazord robot, with terrible animation and weak weapons. Fly involves piloting the Green Ranger's hoverjet with a stuck camera and fiddly controls. Sounds like a proper mess. Gee. The pluses and minuses box is brutal. Pluses, we never have to play it again. The minuses list is long. Appallingly old-fashioned, boring, painful to look at, terrible visuals, and they point out Power Rangers wasn't even popular 5 years ago at this point. Ouch. If you like this, suggests Rugrats in Paris on the N64, giving it 67% and saying it's much better entertainment for kids. Bit of an insult to Rugrats, mind you. They've given it 1 star for sounds, visuals, mastery and lifespan, all bottom marks. For sounds they just quote, 3, 2, 1, go, and say, and that's about it. Visuals are called bland and laughable. Mastery is sarcastic, saying the Power Rangers team ably demonstrate their total lack of talent. Lifespan is described as 60 of the most bitterly tedious minutes of your life. The verdict box sums it up nicely. More a form of torture than a game. Power Rangers is ugly, crude and all but unplayable. Get it out of our sight. They gave it a 9% score. 9%? That's gotta sting. Sounds like a right stinker. And to be honest, I don't remember anyone back then saying anything good about this Power Rangers game, so this review is probably spot on. Avoid like the plague, I reckon. This page is from the Import Arena section, focusing on games from Japan and America, which is quite handy as the N64 isn't region locked like some consoles were back in the day. It's a preview of Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver, which at the time wasn't out in the UK. They're saying it's the updated version of Pokemon Stadium G/S, and it's causing quite a stir. They mention the original Pokemon Stadium was a big hit, because you could breed your Pokemon on the Game Boy screen, and then battle them in 3D, which was pretty impressive at the time. It seems they are quite excited about this new version, and the 3D graphics. Dowry. They've got some screenshots showing off the battles, with Pokemon like Entei using Gust, Eledian looking a bit psychedelic, and Togepi being described as puny bit harsh. They're also talking about some menu options, being a bit confusing. Talisha. There's a section called Veteran with a Charmander, and they're commenting on how it looks meaner in 3D, but also a bit sleepy. Andrea, whoever she is, seems to be giving them the evils, which must mean she wasn't too impressed. Down in the info burst box, it's got the game details, it's from Nintendo, and the system is the Nintendo 64. Cart size is 128 megabits, and it's for 14 players, standard stuff. Controller and cartridge save are ticked, expansion and rumble packs are crossed out, and transfer pack is ticked. It was out in Japan and America in March, and coming out in October in the UK, and costing about £39, which was a fair bit of pocket money back then. They also mention it's passport compatible, meaning you can play it on a UK console with a converter cartridge, and gives a code E93E06580000 for some reason. Finally, they mention G/S's surf animation being a big improvement, and show a screenshot of a baby battler getting started and a Quagsire using surf, so it must look alright then. Overall, it's a typical import preview, getting us excited about a game we couldn't play just yet. This page is all about Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver. Looks like they've got a bit of a match report going on, pitting the classic Charmander against Cyndaquil, one of the new fire starters from the Gold and Silver games. It's a bit of office fun, deciding who's the best by having a Pokemon battle, you know how it is. The screenshots are all from the Japanese version, so it's clearly an import preview. They even mention being eager for the translation to come out. They featured Entei quite prominently, one of the legendary Pokemon from Gold and Silver, looking rather majestic. And down below they're showing off battles with Aipom and Tyrogue too. Sting like a Beedrill is a bit much, but I suppose they're trying to hype up the action of Pokemon Stadium on the N64. March 2001, yeah, Gold and Silver was still the big thing then, everyone was mad for them. This page is all about Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver on the N64, focusing on the minigames they've added. It's called Monster Minigames, funnily enough. They reckon the minigames are a welcome break from the usual battles, and they're not wrong, some of them were a laugh. The first one they mention is about jumping into the center to grab some fruit. Simple enough. Then there's one with Hitmontop. Looks a bit like a Mario Party minigame, where you bash each other about. Scyther and Pinsir get a look in with a log cutting challenge, which sounds a bit odd but alright. Kizen game. Number 4 is Chansey's egg catching game, classic stuff. Then there's a four-way air hockey game, which they reckon is their favorite. Finally, there's a Pokemon counting game, which they say is tricky because they move fast. Sounds like a bit of a laugh for a bit, these mini-games. There's a little bit about playing the Game Boy Pokemon games on your telly, with the GB Tower, which was quite something back then, seeing Gold and Silver in color on a proper screen rather than that tiny Game Boy screen. They say it looks much better than Red and Blue did, which is fair enough, those games were getting on a bit even then. Down the bottom they're banging on about the visuals and attack animations, saying they're superb and astonishing. Bit much, but yeah, they were decent for the time. They also mention the language barrier being a problem, which is true if you imported it from Japan back then. Trying to figure out the menus was a pain sometimes. Overall, sounds like they're pretty impressed with Stadium G/S and the minigames. This page is all about Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver, the import version from Japan. It's a spot the difference piece, comparing it to the older Stadium games, saying it's come on leaps and bounds, technically the third installment. They reckon the main map screen is bigger with more to explore, which is always good, and the gym challenge sounds tougher. They are saying rental Pokemon won't stand a chance, bit dramatic perhaps. The main difference is obviously the Pokemon themselves. Loads of new monsters from Gold and Silver are in there, and they are banging on about how much better the visuals are, crisper and more animations. Which is fair enough, the graphics were always a bit chunky on the N64. Then there's a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are oodles of new features, which is vague. 100 new monsters is a good selling point. Compatibility with Game Boy Adventures, and that it's visually splendid again. Minuses are that you'll need Gold or Silver on Game Boy Color to appreciate it fully, and that commentary, which I remember being a bit annoying in the first Stadium. If you like the old Pokemon Stadium on N64, they reckon you'll like this, obviously. Comic. Accessibility is marked down because it's all in Japanese, naturally, and they are finding the text-heavy menus a pain. Visually, they are giving it top marks. Gorgeous animation and perfect presentation. Sounds are just okay, and the commentary is still there, with a vengeance apparently. Mastery gets an 8, saying it's not pushing the N64 to its limits, but there's loads to do. Lifespan is also an 8, as long as you've got Gold and Silver and a Game Boy you'll be at it for months. Verdict is a massive 90%, calling it a Pokemaniac's dream come true, but they still advise waiting for the English version if you want to get the most out of it, because of the language barrier. There's a section called GENECOMPRENDSPS, which is French for I don't understand, clearly referencing the Japanese text being a nightmare. They're basically saying it's difficult to understand stats and menus unless you know Japanese, and it's impossible to fully appreciate it in import form. They are even suggesting to wait for the translated version, which is sound advice really, unless you are desperate. Looking at the screenshots, you've got Phanpy and Entei battling, Meganium looking a bit static, Miltank doing something weird with music notes, and Mantine swimming about. There are also shots of the map screen, the gym challenge selection, Pokemon selection, and even a weird bedroom scene, which is a bit random. Overall, they are really impressed with Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver. It sounds like a proper step up, but they are definitely saying hold your horses and wait for the English version, unless you can read Japanese or really can't wait to battle with those new Pokemon on your telly. This page focuses on Mario Party 3, doesn't it? It's an import review, as it was out in Japan at the time but not in the UK yet, explaining why we had to use a passport converter to play it on our UK N64s. They mention being stumped by a Japanese quiz minigame, which is fair enough. The main image is a big splash of Mario Party 3 artwork with all the usual suspects: Mario, Luigi, Peach, Yoshi, Wario, Donkey Kong and even Waluigi, who was new to the series if I recall. Gesture. There's an info burst box which gives the details, things like its 128 megabit cartridge, 14 players, no controller or expansion pack needed but Rumble Pack and password saver in. It confirms it was already out in Japan and due in November in the UK. Costing about £39, which was the going rate for a new N64 game back then. They make a little joke about Waluigi not being invited to many parties in a speech bubble. Typical cheeky magazine humor. There are also screenshots of different minigames, like a spinning blocks game and one that looks like a chance game with mushroom panels, and a platforming one with Peach. Nothing too groundbreaking for a Mario Party game visually, but it was always about the multiplayer fun, wasn't it? This page is all about Mario Party 3, blimey, another one already. According to this, they've tried to categorize the 70-odd minigames into 6 types. They've got stick skill minigames, which sound like the usual twisting the control stick type of thing, and reaction test, which is all about quick button presses. Then there's button hammer, bet your thumbs will ache after those. They mention dogfight, which they say is like Lilat Wars, so aerial battles in 3D, sounds a bit hectic on the small screen. Maxi games are apparently mini versions of full games, like Columns and Mario Golf, which is a bit cheeky, isn't it? And finally, random minigames, which they seem a bit sniffy about, saying they're a waste of time. Nendo. They're being a bit harsh on Mario Party 3 overall, it seems, calling it a carbon copy, and saying it's Mario Party too far. They're not impressed with the boards, saying they're worse than ever, and are moaning about the blurry 2D backgrounds. They do admit there's a mini Mario Golf game in there, and a jet ski race, but the jet ski one they call a tiresome jet ski race. Ouch. They do mention familiar faces from Super Mario 64 in the game, which is nice, like that Nessie thing from Hazy Maze Cave, and the big eyeball from Big Boo's Haunt. Proper retro throwback there. Seems like they're a bit jaded with the Mario Party formula already, even back then. Fair enough, I suppose, they were churning them out, weren't they? This page is a review of Mario Party 3 headlined Out with the Old. They're talking about how it's got two new modes, dual mode and story mode. Dual mode sounds like a laugh. Two players wandering around boards and bumping into each other to take chunks out of health. A bit different to your standard Mario Party fare. Story mode is more of a solo affair against the computer, which they say should be fun, but you're at the mercy of Lady Luck, which can be a bit cheeky with computer opponents in these games. Two-chair. They've got a little box saying, if you like this, couriered. Mario Party 2. Basically saying if you've already got Mario Party 2, maybe stick with that. Accessibility is mentioned, saying it's intuitive but Japanese menus might flummox you, which was always a pain with import games back then. Visually they reckon it's nothing changed since Mario Party 2, disappointingly old-fashioned, which is a bit harsh, but they had high standards back then. Sounds are still good. Hudson's musicians always did a decent job. Mastery is a bit weak, not much improvement over the original Mario Party from 3 years prior, which feels like a lifetime in video games. Lifespan is decent if you've got mates to play with, otherwise maybe not so much. They've got a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are loads of mini-games, plenty to enjoy in multiplayer, and story mode is challenging. Minuses are almost nothing changed since Mario Party 2, tiresomely lengthy games, especially without humans, and few secrets. The verdict section at the bottom just says it's still enjoyable, but Hudson needs new ideas, and if you have the prequel, don't bother with this one. It got a score of 74%, which is alright, but not amazing. There's a little pick-me-up section talking about items in the game, saying Mario Party 3 is big on collectible items from shops, Toad Tiles and Bowser. Items like genie lamps and dueling gloves, which sound like they can cause some proper arguments amongst mates. Overall, it sounds like Mario Party 3 is a decent game, but maybe not a massive leap forward from the previous one, and they're suggesting if you've got Mario Party 2 already, you're not missing out on a huge amount. Standard yearly iteration feeling, really. This page of Video Gamer Magazine, issue 04, it seems, blimey, 99p, those were the days. Right on the cover we've got Zidane from Final Fantasy IX looking all moody. Spellbound, it shouts. Swords, sorcery and saving the girl in Final Fantasy IX. Bit dramatic, isn't it? But yeah, Final Fantasy IX was a proper big deal back then. Everyone was buzzing for it, especially after all the hype around Final Fantasy V2 and V2i. This one was a bit more back to basics fantasy, which some people liked. I remember thinking Zidane looked a bit of a spanner, mind you, with that tail, but each to their own, eh? Then down the side, they've crammed in a few bits to tempt you. WWF, SmackDown, 2. For the PlayStation, wrestling games were always a laugh with mates, button mashing chaos. Next up, ESPN Winter X Games Snowboarding for the PlayStation 2. Can't say I was ever that bothered with snowboarding games myself, bit niche wasn't it? Donald Duck Quack Attack on the PlayStation 2 as well, aimed at the younger crowd. I reckon Disney games were always a bit hit and miss. The Legend of Dragoon, another PlayStation 1, that was a JRPG wasn't it? Bit slower paced than Final Fantasy if I recall, but looked quite flashy at the time with all the dragon stuff. And lastly, FIFA 2001. PlayStation 2 again, you knew FIFA would be there every year like clockwork. At the bottom it says be better at games with Video Gamer, a new breed of games magazine. Bit of a bold claim, issue 4, they were certainly trying to make a splash. On sale now, it yells, with an email address, vgmfuturenet.co.uk, there you go. Simple as that. This page is the Club 64 section, looks like the contents page for this part of the magazine. Right at the top it's welcoming you to Total Game Service for Nintendo 64 owners, so you know exactly what you're getting. The main feature this month is Zelda. Majora's Mask, which was still pretty fresh at this point, must have been the big talking point. There's a screenshot of Link in Clocktown, looks like he's talking to that creepy Deku Butler fellow, and another one showing him battling baddies, classic Zelda stuff. Yuki. Then you've got the regular sections, Club 64 mailbox for readers' letters, Tips Extra for hints and cheats to get you through those tricky bits, Game On, which is probably news and previews, and I'm the Best, where people send in their high scores, always good for a bit of bragging rights. Skill Millennium, sounds like a section for showing off your skills, or maybe some kind of competition. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, sounds a bit like they're giving out gaming advice if you're stuck, a bit of a gamer agony aunt. Then there's a directory, which is probably a listing of games reviewed and rated. And finally, subscriptions if you want to get the mag delivered. Save yourself a trip to the newsagents, you know. Each section has a page number next to it, handy for finding what you need. And at the bottom it says March 2001, so yeah, right in the middle of the N64's life, and page 53 of the mag itself. Standard contents page, really, but for the N64 faithful. This page is the mailbox section, Club 64 mailbox, where readers write in. Looks like there's a star letter at the top, which is about PL region gaming and how New Zealand gamers seem to get games early. The reader, Peter Osborne from New Zealand, is asking why they get games late in the UK, especially compared to PL territories. He mentions Banjo-Tooie and Excitebike being out there, and is surprised about the preferential treatment for New Zealand gamers, and wonders if this will happen with GameCube too. Ed, the editor, replies mentioning the old 1080 snowboarding situation where Nintendo delayed the UK release for ages, and says it's now about language issues causing delays for European releases, but suggests importing from tons of games in Australia, as they seem pretty reliable and reasonably priced. Then there's a correction corner section, which is always a bit of a laugh when they get stuff wrong. Patrick Rosser is writing in about them calling Majora's Mask an import when it had UK releases, and asks about ISS 64 being reviewed in issue 41 when it wasn't. Ed's response is a bit cheeky, saying, "Mistakes? We don't make mistakes. Classic." He explains the Majora's Mask thing and says about ISS 64, he'll have to put it right. Another reader, Mashup Martin, gets a funny reply for pointing out a mistake. John Davies writes in about Pokemon names in issue 47 page 9, saying they got Waninoko/Arigaitsu wrong, and it's actually Ordile, and also about the Who/Who Japanese/US name confusion, and Matai should be Mantain. Ed just replies, "Want a job?" They always take it on the chin in these mags, which is good. Finally, there's the hardcore section. Chris Chang is writing in about a problem with WWF No Mercy, where his save data got erased after completing a belt. He'd earned Earl Hebner and the jackhammer move, proper hardcore stuff that. He contacted THQ, and they said they're working on it but don't know what the problem is. Ed replies saying they've spoken to THQ, and they are working on a solution, but aren't sure exactly what's wrong. Seems like a proper pain if you lost all your No Mercy progress. That game took ages to unlock everything. There's a photo of the WWF wrestlers at the bottom, probably the guys from No Mercy, looking all muscly and intimidating, proper WWF Attitude Era stuff. This page is the mailbag section, Club 64 mailbox, where readers fire off their letters. First up, someone called Weaver got mentioned on Big Breakfast, a morning TV show here in the UK. Apparently his game of choice was Zelda, Majora's Mask, which, considering it had been out for a bit, shows he's a dedicated Zelda fan. Another letter is about a PS2 advert, and the reader is not impressed, saying it was rubbish basically. They mention Crash Bandicoot and the Xbox as well, noting Sony's marketing might be a bit off. Then there's someone who wants more letters published, fair enough. Finally, there's a game idea called Dream on Mario's Enemies. It's for Super Mario 64, and the idea is you play as Bowser, and control all the baddies, Koopa Troopers, Goombas and all that lot. You set them up around the level and try to stop Mario getting to the end. Sounds a laugh, a bit like Command & Conquer but with Mario characters. The magazine seems to think it's a good idea, and says it sounds like a decent strategy game. They even put in a little picture of Bowser and Mario in a snowy level to illustrate it. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 52, opens with the bonus letters section. It's a few readers writing in. Ben Poor from Ashbourne starts it off with, "There's a bit of Mark in us all," to which Ed, presumably the editor, responds with a classic, "Speak for yourself." Bit of back and forth about editor errors. Bernard Cribbins, the guy from the Wombles and Railway Children, apparently some people hadn't heard of him, which Ed finds shocking and uses it as an excuse about getting old, huh? Then there's a funny one about Fire Mark, he'll burn better if you force-feed him motor oil, from Ryan Finbar, via email. Ed just says, "But we love him," classic. Blind Beggar and Puppies, Cursed or Paranoid, replacing Big Stick with a cattle prod. "Only when Judd starts singing," says Ed. Standard moan about things taking ages to arrive in England, and a question about Rob Koopman from issue 50, followed by, "Good question." And finally Tom Winfield looking forward to Mark becoming editor, with Ed's final word being, "cretin." Just general reader banter, you know the sort. Next up is Bargain Hunter. It highlights good deals on games found by readers. Lorna Reed from Birchington gets a prize for spotting some bargains. Electronics Boutique are flogging GoldenEye 007/Ocarina of Time/Episode 1, Racer Triple Packs, and GoldenEye 007/Ocarina of Time Double Packs, and Mario Golf, all at reasonable prices for back then. HMV are doing Ocarina of Time and Banjo-Kazooie. GameStation has World Driver Championship, and Silicon Valley, again, budget titles. And Chips looks like an online retailer, are doing second-hand 1080 degrees snowboarding. Just your typical roundup of where to find cheaper games. Then there's So Tell Me This, a Q&A section. Someone called Chris Nicolai is asking if the 64DD was a success and about Jess developing for Nintendo, and if GameCube will be released in 2002. Ed basically says 64DD was a flop, Jess probably had plans but software support wasn't there, and GameCube US release is October, with the UK probably later, and no, he doesn't like Belgian beer. Then Tom Mason asks about Shadowman games and Mission Impossible 2. Ed says Acclaim stopped N64 development, but there might be a Shadowman title still coming, and Mission Impossible 2 is likely on next-gen consoles. Stephen Mitchell is asking about SmackDown 2 and No Mercy being the same on different consoles, and if No Mercy is any good. Ed says they're published by THQ but different games, and they rated No Mercy in issue 49 but found a glitch. Carl Thompson is asking about Bomberman 64, The Second Attack, Kirby 64 Delayed, Star Wars Demolition, and Animal Forest. Ed replies, Bomberman, when is it coming out in the UK? When is Bomberman 64, The Second Attack coming out in the UK? Answer is, when indeed, no release date given. Kirby 64 delayed to July 2001. Star Wars Demolition isn't coming to N64. No. You'll have to make do with Battle for Naboo. Sarcastic as ever. And Animal Forest is out in Japan in March 2001. Review coming soon. Standard reader questions and editor answers about release dates and game news. Nothing too groundbreaking. This page is the mailbox section. Looks like folks are writing in to air their views and ask questions. Warrington Norsa. First off, there's a bit of a rant defending Michael Jackson in Ready to Rumble 2. Seems someone is miffed at the bad press Jacko was getting and reckons he deserves credit for being in the game, especially as he apparently recorded his moves in secret and the coders were chuffed when they found out. There's even a line about his oxygen tent donation. Right then. Below that, someone's made a joke about Billie Jean is not my glove ear, in relation to boxing. Bit cheesy, but alright. Aida. Then there's a bunch of questions from readers. Max Hodges is asking about Pokemon Gold and Silver working on non-Game Boy Color machines, Glover 2, and the Banjo-Kazooie/Tooie link-up rumor being cancelled and what it means for the ice key in Gobi's door. DJ Hayes is asking if SM128 is separate from Luigi's Mansion and for any Conker's Bad Fur Day news. The magazine answers that yes, Pokemon Gold and Silver will work on older Game Boys, but probably near the end of their run. Glover 2 apparently never quite made it, which isn't surprising, never really heard much about that one after the first game. For the Banjo-Kazooie/Tooie link, they're still not sure how it works, but direct readers to issue 51 for tips on the ice key in Gobi's door. For DJ Hayes' questions, they say Mother 3 is expected on GameCube. Interesting, that never actually happened on the Cube, did it? Super Mario 128 will appear on GameCube if you fancy it, which became Pikmin I suppose, and Conker's Bad Fur Day is now scheduled for a September release in the UK, but they'll have a review of the US version when it comes out in March. There's also another set of quick questions asking about RIQA, Eternal Darkness, Earthbound 2/Mother 3, and 1080 Snowboarding 2, and if Mario 64 2 is really Super Mario 128 for the GameCube. They don't really answer these directly but sort of roll them into the previous answers. Say. Alongside the text, there are drawings sent in by readers. Francis Atkins sent in a Pokemon picture, they call it a Pokepic, and Julie Ho did a Link drawing which they say is a great pencil portrait. There's another Link drawing by James Smith, and a Misato from Neon Genesis picture. Finally, there's a collage of characters from Lee Warren, a proper mixed bag of fan art. All quite standard letters page fare really, asking about upcoming games and rumors at the time. This page is all about The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask, a proper deep dive into how to find absolutely everything in the game. They're calling it a war across time, which is a bit dramatic, even for Majora's Mask. It mentions you might have used their free AZ guide from issue 50 to help with the tricky bits. Cheeky plug there. There's a What We Said section where they are quoting their original review, banging on about how amazing it was, giving it a massive 96%. A stunning, bewilderingly accomplished sequel, they said. Bit over the top. But yeah, it was good. A hair's breadth away from perfection. Alright, calm down, it's not Citizen Kane. Buy it now. Yeah, no kidding, it's been out for ages. Reg. Then there's a how to get loads bit, giving tips on how to get rupees. They mention the Takuri bird in Termina Field, risky business apparently, and getting a room key from Anju in Clocktown to find 100 rupees. A silver rupee, fancy that. And another tip about using the bunny hood at the milk bar, jumping on the sign of Honey and Darlings, then going forward and right to get another chest. Sneaky. There are some screenshots of Link in-game fighting enemies, and one with the game's timer running down. It's all about getting those rupees in Clocktown and Termina, proper useful stuff for anyone struggling to keep their wallet full in Majora's Mask. Good old N64 Mag, always looking out for us. This page is all about making money in Zelda, Majora's Mask, which, back in '01 you always needed more of, didn't you? It's titled Of Money, and gives you a few pointers on how to become a proper rupee tycoon in Termina. First up, it mentions Termina Field. Apparently, if you wander around and play the Song of Snowhead, near some writing on the walls, you'll get a load of moolah. Then there's Gerudo Lagoon, where you can use the stone mask in a room full of guards to snag a silver rupee. Sneaky, that. Idat. Ikana Valley at night is apparently good for blue bubbles. Kill them with light arrows and they'll drop 50 rupees each, and they keep coming back. Bit grindy but effective. They also suggest trading the ocean title deed with the Deku Scrub in Ikana Canyon for a rupee. Every little helps, I suppose. And if you're good at the shooting gallery in Clocktown, a perfect score gets you a massive rupee. Presumably silver, but maybe they're hyping it up a bit too much there. There's also tips about mowing down Dodongos in North Termina Field on Epona for 50 rupees, helping the postman at his office for another 50, and killing Redeads in Ikana Castle with certain masks to improve your financial health. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Lastly, they suggest the Mamamoo Yan doggy racetrack at Romani Ranch, using the Mask of Truth for big winnings, and finding a silver rupee in the employees only room in the Stockpot Inn. Always worth checking those places, eh? Overall, it's a decent little guide if you were struggling for cash in Majora's Mask. Probably useful if you were just starting out, or if you just weren't very good at managing your rupees, which, let's be honest, was most of us at some point. This page is all about hidden holes in Majora's Mask. Classic N64 stuff really, proper treasure hunting. It's a how-to guide, telling you where to find these secret spots in Termina Field, Woodfall, and Snowhead. In Termina Field, you're looking near Ikana Canyon for a heart piece, another by the observatory for another heart piece, one near the North Clocktown Gate for gossip stones, and finally one in the southeast field for rupees. Then it moves on to Woodfall, pointing out locations like the Deku Palace Gardens for magic beans, Southern Swamp for rupees and heart piece, and the Woods of Mystery for more rupees. Lastly, Snowhead is covered, with holes near the Twin Islands for rupees and a hot spring, and another near Darmani's grave also for rupees. So lots of rupees and heart pieces to be found, if you know where to look. There's also a how-to section on answering Keaton's questions, because who could forget that tricky quiz, eh? Plus they've got a bunch of Majora's Mask trivia down the side, asking things like what time Romani goes to bed, what Tingle's spell is, Kulu Limpa of course, which tribe Darmani and Mikau belong to, what weapon Romani uses, what kind of instrument the Skull Kid plays, and even how old Tingle is. 35 apparently. And they even ask about Anju's cooking skills, or lack thereof. It's a proper deep dive into Majora's Mask, reminds you how packed that game was with little details. Loads of screenshots scattered about showing the hidden holes, and a big ol' image of Majora's Mask looking rather menacing on the side, just in case you forgot who the bad guy was. Good times. Majora's Mask was a bit of a Marmite game back then. Some loved it, some found it a bit too strange, but you can't deny it was unique. This page is all about finding the Bomber Kids in Majora's Mask. Right then, as if we didn't spend hours doing that already, it's showing you where to sniff out these little blighters in Great Bay and Ikana, pointing to spots for heart pieces and bombchus, you know, the usual Zelda fare. It mentions sticking bombs under stones and behind walls, classic puzzle solving, if you can even call it that. Aseta. Then there's a did you know bit, testing your Majora's Mask knowledge. It's asking things like the name of Romani's song, Epona's song, naturally. How many cow statues in Clocktown? 10 apparently, if you were counting. Lulu's the Zora singer. Chateau Romani is the vintage milk. Grasshopper is Link's nickname at Romani Ranch. Carnival of Time is the Clocktown festival. Mama is what the bomb shop owner calls her mum. Dontor is Clocktown's mayor. Tortoise is Anju's dad. Jim is the bomber's leader. Tingle's trousers are red. Creamier takes milk bottles to the milk bar, and the Stockpot Inn is the hotel in Clocktown. Bit obvious really, but I suppose for some people still getting their heads around Majora's Mask's weirdness, it might be helpful. Good game though, bit bleak for Zelda mind you, all that moon crashing down business. This page from N64 Magazine is all about finding heart pieces in Majora's Mask, specifically in Clocktown and Termina Field. Right then, heart pieces, classic Zelda collectathon stuff. Back in '01, we were all still properly hooked on Majora's Mask, weren't we? It was a bit darker than Ocarina, a bit weirder, and definitely harder in some respects, especially if you were trying to get everything done before the moon fell. For Clocktown, they've got a bunch of the usual suspects listed. Wearing the couple's mask for the mayor, that's a funny one. Answering Keaton's quiz, always a bit of a brain tickler if you hadn't looked up the answers online. Giving the paper to the hand in the Stockpot Inn's toilet. Yeah, who knew a bog ghost wanted paper? Jumping to the tree from the slide in North Clocktown. That's a bit of platforming for you. Then there's the postman's cap trick, using it at the mailbox, a one-time deal they say. Cheeky. Beating the swordsman's school with just jump attacks. Show off. Perfect score at the shooting gallery. Good luck with that one, it's not exactly Duck Hunt. Honey and Darlings challenges over 3 days, that's dedication. Getting the moon's tear, and giving it to the Deku flower to reach the heart on the clock tower. That's a bit of puzzle solving mixed with platforming. Listening to Anju's stories with the all-night mask, you had to be patient for that one. Dancing for the twins with Kamaro's mask, bit of a silly one. Anju's grandmother's second story question, more story listening. Saving 5,000 rupees at the bank, that's a good chunk of change back then. The postman's 10-second challenge, those postmen were always in a rush, weren't they? And finally, as Goron Link, apparently reaching the end of the game in the treasure chest shop, which sounds a bit cryptic. Moving on to Tamina Field, they've got defeating a P-hat during the day, those things were a nuisance. Talking to Akindo Nut and watching him with the telescope to buy a heart, a bit of a weird side quest. Then there's shooting down the beehive, after beating Bio Deku Babas near Great Bay. Killing 2 Dodongos in a hidden hole near Snowhead, that's some monster hunting. And lastly, the Gossip Stone holes, where you have to change them all to the same color using the Goron Lullaby. More music puzzle stuff, classic Zelda. So yeah, there's your heart piece guide for Clocktown and Tamina Field, straight from the pages of N64 Magazine. Pretty handy stuff back then, before everyone just looked everything up online. This page is from the Club 64 How-To section, and it's all about finding absolutely everything in The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. Looking at the page, it's broken down by regions: Snowhead, Woodfall, Great Bay, and Romani Ranch. For Snowhead, it's reminding you to use Donjero's mask after the dungeon to gather the 5 frogs from various locations including Clocktown, Woodfall Temple and so on to get something. Woodfall section starts by saying you need to rescue Kume and clear the Woodfall Temple, then play her game and score over 20. There are also tips for getting another heart piece on an island near the Woodfall entrance. It mentions getting a title deed from an Akindo Nut and using his flower. Then on the road to Southern Swamp, it suggests dealing with bad bats and climbing vines. Another tip mentions searching the northwest corner of the Deku Palace Gardens for something. Finally, it talks about using the Lens of Truth on the path to the temple to find a platform and using the Scarecrow's song. Great Bay section begins with feeding bottled fish to aquarium fish at the Weird Research Lab. It also points out Mikau's loft, reading his journal, then jamming with Japas, and playing the results to Evan as a human. Then there's the like at the bottom of the waterfall in Zora Cape to deal with. A tip for getting a picture of a Gerudo pirate for the Great Bay shopkeeper, to get a golden seahorse which you take to Pinnacle Rock to fight deep pythons. Another tip in Zora Hall involves giving a title deed to an Akindo Nut and using his flower to reach a heart piece. Finally, in the sewers of Gerudo Fortress, you need to break barrels as Goron Link to reach a cage. Romani Ranch section is about winning a bet at the dog track. It says to use the Mask of Truth to find the fastest dog and bet on it, needing to win over 150 rupees for a heart piece. The winning dog apparently says some amusing things. Then it's on to the captain's hat to talk to star children in the Spider House and shooting shields in a specific order. Lastly, it mentions winning a bottle from the Beaver Bros at Waterfall Rapids and defeating them again to get a heart piece. It's a handy guide for completionists back in the day, making sure you didn't miss a thing in Majora's Mask. Things like the frog choir and the dog racing were memorable side quests, and these tips would have been welcome to ensure you got all the heart pieces and extras. This page is all about Majora's Mask, as you can probably guess from the green color scheme and moody Link staring out at you. It's giving us tips and tricks, typical for these mags back then, when the internet wasn't quite the walkthrough machine it is now. First up, it's warning you about Takuri, the thieving bird. Remember that pain? Stealing your sword, cheeky git. They tell you to go to the curiosity shop to buy it back for 50 rupees, or play the Song of Time if he nabs something else. Solid advice, saved me a few rupees back in the day, that's for sure. Torpesha. Then we get into Ikana, that creepy, desolate region. It's guiding you through finding a shrine, using the light arrows, and dealing with those horrible Griblies. The ancient castle gets a mention too, with the mirror shield puzzle and reaching a heart container. Good stuff if you were stuck there. Dealing. Next it's how to upgrade sword. Raise a sword first 100 rupees to the blacksmith in Snowhead, and it lasts for 100 hits. Remember being stingy and trying to make that sword last. Then the gilded sword following on from the razor sword and needing gold dust from the springtime Goron races. That Goron race was a pain, wasn't it? But the gilded sword was worth it. Looked proper bling. Deity Gaiety is next, and it's all about getting fierce Deity Link. Planting a magic bean where you got the moon's tear and doing Honey and Darling's challenge on the final day as Deku Link, all while wearing the fierce deity mask. It's a bit convoluted, isn't it? But who didn't want to be fierce deity Link? Absolutely smashed everything with that form. Finally, Moon section, and they're giving you tips for heart pieces in the Moon dungeons. Goron, Deku, Zora and Link hide-and-seek dungeons. Roll as Goron, use Deku leaves, jump in water as Zora, and beat an iron knuckle as Link. Standard dungeon fare really, but helpful if you are hunting down all those heart pieces. Gotta get your full quota of hearts, haven't you? All in all, a decent tips page, nothing groundbreaking, but exactly what you expected from N64 Magazine at the time. Helpful pointers for Majora's Mask, when you needed a bit of a nudge. This page is all about getting yourself sorted out in Majora's Mask, proper essential gear, and some cheeky little tricks. Right then, first up is your kit, covering your wallet, bomb bag and quiver. For your wallet, they're reminding you about the adult's wallet. Easy peasy, just bung 200 rupees in the bank in West Clocktown, and Bob's your uncle, holds 200 rupees. Then there's the giant wallet, bit more effort that one, needing all 30 gold skull chulas from the Great Bay Spider House on the first day. Remember those creepy crawlies? Good times. Remember bola. Bomb bags next. Standard bomb bag, you just buy it for 50 rupees at the bomb shop. Bigger bomb bag, you have to stop that robbery in North Clocktown on the first night. Or if you miss that, you can get it in the curiosity shop the next day. Then the biggest bomb bag, 200 rupees to that Akindo nut geezer in Snowhead to upgrade it. Nice. Quivers, well, the big quiver is from getting a high score in the Clocktown shooting gallery, or a perfect score at the swamp one. And the biggest quiver, apparently you just need to beat the high score in the Clocktown gallery again. Simple as that. Dayo. Then we've got a section called I Don't Believe It. Bit dramatic, aren't they? First trick is using the bunny hood to glitch into Sakon's hideout, rolling into a crack. Sneaky. They also mention using the blast mask without hurting yourself by holding up your shield, and using the Bremen mask to make King Igo's henchmen dance. And finally, riding Epona to the East Clocktown entrance just before the day ends to get inside town on horseback the next day. Cheeky shortcuts, those were the days. Lastly, how-tos, EA. Find all the bottles. Because you can never have too many bottles in a Zelda game, can you? EA. Bottle number 1 involves Kotake and Kume in the Woods of Mystery, and their potion shop sister. Bit of a fetch quest for that red potion. Bottle 2. Blowing up Romani Ranch's entrance with a powder keg, dealing with UFOs, and getting Chateau Romani, that posh milk. Number 3 is from the Goron races. Beat Ganon, not that Ganon, mind the Goron racer Ganon, and you get gold dust to upgrade your sword, plus a bottle. Number 4, you're off to the Marine Research Centre, racing beavers for an empty bottle. Bonkers. Bottle 5 is tied to the Anju/Cafe side quest, the long one, giving Mama's letter to Anju in the milk bar while wearing Cafe's mask for Chateau Romani and a bottle. And finally number 6, Ikana Graveyard on the final night, Captain's Hat, Dampe Big Po, and another empty bottle. There you go, 6 bottles in total. Plenty of milk and fairies then. This page of the magazine is all about tips for a few top N64 games, classic stuff really. First up we've got WWF No Mercy, still a proper wrestling game even now. It's showing off some special moves for D'Lo Brown, moves like Sky High, German Suplex Pin, and the Low Down. Apparently to pull these off you gotta be in the special attitude meter, which anyone who played it back then knows was key to battering your mates. Next, it's Zelda, Majora's Mask. For this, the tip is about avoiding enemies by using the stone mask after giving a soldier red potion. Bit of a faff, but worth it if you were rubbish at fighting back then. Then there's a tip about getting a heart piece from talking to frogs in the Goron Shrine. Classic Zelda sidequest material. You had to light torches, sing the Goron lullaby to a sleepy Goron, all that jazz to get them frogs together. Moving on to Pokemon Stadium, it's all about changing the colors of your Pokemon by messing about with their names. Lowercase, swapped letters, truncated names, anything goes really. They give examples like Leprance for a lighter blue, or Executenza for purple and red yolk. Bit of a weird thing to focus on, but hey, it's there. Oh, and it mentions that if you use a Pikachu imported from Pokemon Yellow in Stadium, it'll actually say its name in battles, bless. Been there. Lastly, Pokemon Snap. The tips here are for getting better pictures. One's about doing a Swerve 01 in the buggy on the beach course, which apparently helps you get closer to Pokemon, handy for the pesky ones that were always too far away. The other is about taking pictures of Pikachu on Electrode in the tunnel course. Apparently, if you get a good snap of Pikachu balancing, you could net over 4,000 points. Trying to get those high scores in Snap was a right laugh, wasn't it? This page is all about cheat tips for various N64 games, proper old school stuff. Kicking off with Mario Tennis, they're suggesting a sneaky service trick to bamboozle the computer. Just shuffle inwards and catch the ball apparently throws them off. Then they're on about smashing a cross-court shot. Mario Party 2 is next, and it's the classic Shy Guy Says minigame they're giving advice for. Don't even bother following Shy Guy when he's wobbling the flag, just hold up the last one. Cheeky, but it works. And for coughing congestion, just keep your eye on the hidden object. Simple as that really. Caucus. Then it's on to The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. For jumping on turncoat, apparently going sideways and holding C button is the way to go to clear the gaps. And for cold reception, if you're struggling for time, tapping top C and left C slows down time to get the body armor. Tom and Jerry. Fists of Furry is there with a tip to unlock Duckling as a playable character by finishing the game as Tom. Lego Racers gets a mention. They are telling you how to use Basil the Batlord's car parts. Win Basil's track in circuit mode in second or third place, then win a race on Johnny Thunder's circuit, then go into build mode and create your driver in quick build, and select Johnny Thunder's chassis and Basil the Batlord build. Press build again, and you'll see the Batlord parts. Bit of a faff, to be honest. Lastly, Perfect Dark. They are explaining how to see Velvet by playing Coup and having player 2 finish first, then you'll get Velvet's head with Joanna's voice. For Area 51 in Perfect Dark, they say you can clear the way to the rocket launcher by lobbing grenades on the floor by the fence, and then just walk straight to the weapon. Right at the bottom is a tip for the top. It's about Sin and Punishment, a proper import shooter that never officially made it over here. Stunning anime-style game apparently. They explained last month how to play it on a UK machine using a passport converter, and if you did manage to get a Japanese copy, they're hinting at using a handy hint. Finally, for all the music, once you complete any game on easy, you unlock the music test in the configuration menu to listen to all the tunes. Good luck with that, they say. This page is the reader's top 15 tips section from Club 64 in N64 Magazine. Looks like they're giving away an Action Replay Equalizer Extreme and an N64 badge for the best tip. Fancy that, Warrington? Right then, tip number 1 is for Zelda, Majora's Mask. Telling you to play the lottery and remember the numbers because they never change. A bit obvious if you ask me, but hey, maybe someone needed to be told. Next up, Mario Tennis. Suggesting you force the computer player to the net and lob over them in the Piranha Challenge. Cheeky but effective. Classic Mario Tennis tactics. Worry. Number 3 is for FIFA 98. Apparently you can do a rainbow kick by double tapping bottom C while running with the ball. Sounds fiddly but could be worth it to show off. Tip 4. Back to Majora's Mask. This one involves putting on the bunny hood, jumping around in East Clock Town to get onto the milk bar and then onto the Honey and Darling sign, and apparently you find a chest of 100 rupees. Seems like a bit of a faff for that reward. Tip 5 is for Smash Bros. Saying if your teammate has taken a beating, throw an explosive item at them and they'll return with full health and you get a point. Bit of a weird one that. Never tried that myself. Mario Tennis again for tip 6, recommending playing as DK Jr. and serving from the edge of the court and just holding direction on the stick to make sure they can't get near the ball. Ginoffer. Mario Kart 64 tip at number 7, go to the title screen, and just before the demo starts press A to get a new demo with no sound or music. Bit pointless if you ask me, but each to their own. Tip 8 is for F1 WGP, change the Williams driver surname to Pyrite, and you can access the superfast gold driver and gold race car. Sounds like a proper cheat, those were the days. Perfect Dark tip at number 9, in the first level, go past Cassandra's office, crawl towards the window and under the stairs to find a tiny ammo box. Every little helps in Perfect Dark, I suppose. Number 10, Mario Tennis again. Choose a fast character, serve and move back and your opponent will do a drop shot, run forward and smash it for an easy point. Another tennis tactic. Space Station Silicon Valley tip at number 11. To unlock asteroids on the game select screen, enter up, Z, L, down, left, Z and down. Also, apparently you can carry animals around the place by positioning them on top of the creature, larger than them. Sweet! Number 12 is a Perfect Dark tip again. On the ravine level, go onto the pipe as Elvis, step off the edge and go inside the pipe, and the Sims can't get you. Sounds like a good hiding spot. WrestleMania 2000 tip at number 13. In a tag team match, grapple someone from behind and press top C. Your partner will get on your opponent's shoulders, and Chum will deliver a flying elbow. Sounds like a good tag team move. Perfect Dark again for tip 14. In Area 51, infiltration, go to where you plant the explosives and lob a grenade at the console instead. Objective isn't complete, but you can hide in the big what's-it either side of the screen in Coop. That's a bit of a weird one, but might be fun to try with your mate. Finally, tip number 15 is for Zelda, Ocarina of Time, go to the Lost Woods as an adult and find the Skull Kid you sold the mask to as a child, kill him and you get a 200 rupee reward. But don't do a jump attack as he'll run away, bit mean-spirited that tip, but rupees are rupees in Ocarina of Time. And at the bottom there's a cut-out form to send in your own tips to Tips Extra N64 Magazine at their Bath address, and if your tip is good enough to be Tip of the Month you get something extra special, probably another badge. Good times, good times. This page showcases some cracking Perfect Dark challenges, proper multiplayer fun back in the day. We've got Ride and Blast, a challenge dreamt up by Daniel Channa from South Sea. Basically you need to use the unlimited ammo cheat, grab a mate for co-op on Area 51, infiltration, clear out the enemies, then one player grabs a rocket launcher and the other hops on a hoverbike. The aim is for the rocket launcher guy to blast the hoverbike as many times as possible before the biker gets killed. Medals are awarded based on blasts survived, with gold for 35, silver for 20, and bronze for 10. Next up is Slayer Racer, courtesy of David Morris from Merseyside. This one's for 4 players in Complex or Temple, all set to Slayers. One player goes without a weapon, the other 3 pick up Slayer weapons and hide at the opposite end of the level. The weaponless player counts down from 3, then launches a rocket at the Slayers. The winner is the person who launches the rocket. They suggest playing 5 or so rounds to sort out medal distribution. Then there's Super Shot Snipers, from John Graves at Stanley's Challenge. This is a sniper shootout on grid. 2 teams, no simulants, sniper rifles only. You need to stock up on ammo in the main area, hide behind the posts on your side, and then snipe away across the room. You're only allowed to move along the breadth of the room behind the posts. Wins are tallied out of 10 matches, with medals awarded for 710 wins, 46 and 13. Finally we've got Silent Scope, another sneaky challenge. This one is a 4-player battle with one-hit kills. Half the weapon slots are sniper rifles. Pick your arena. Area 52 is suggested. 3 players go into the sniper towers, and the 4th player drops down into the moat with a pistol to try and take out the snipers. Medal pinnage is based on snipers offed, with gold for 5, silver for 3 and bronze for 1. Sounds like a laugh. Proper N64 multiplayer chaos. This page is all about challenges for classic N64 games, proper retro stuff this. First up they've got IS-98, now that's a blast from the past. The Gifted Goalie Challenge is all about proving you're the best keeper. You gotta dive into training mode, manually control your goalie, and then just stop as many shots as possible in 2 minutes. They're giving out gold medals for 11 to 15 saves, silver for 6 to 10, and bronze if you barely touched the ball, which is probably fair enough. Next it's Diddy Kong Racing, and the challenge is called Splat. Warrington say. Sounds messy. Apparently you gotta get into adventure mode, find the elephant, give him a honk, then hop in your plane, and go splatting frogs. They're even marking some frogs red for extra points. Cheeky. Gold medal if you splat 8 or more, silver for 6 or 7, and bronze for 4 or 5. Good bit of silly fun that game was. Cheeky. Then, they've moved on to Super Smash Bros. With a Kirby football challenge. Now this sounds a bit bonkers. 3-player free-for-all, player 1 and 2 are Fox, player 3 is Kirby, and you're in the DK jungle stage. Kirby just sits in the middle doing nothing, and the Foxes are supposed to boot him off the sides of the screen for goals. 10 goals gets you gold, 7 silver, and 5 bronze. Sounds like a laugh with mates. Whoa! Lastly, there's a Zelda, Majora's Mask challenge, Goron Rally. Of course it is. You've got to have the Goron mask head to Snowhead, lull the blizzard-blowing Goron to sleep, classic Majora's Mask stuff. Then, as Goron Link, you roll up the mountain and see how far you can get, before you run out of magic or fall off. Summit gets you gold, bottom of the mountain silver, and reaching the second flag is bronze. That Goron rolling was always a bit tricky. Fair play to anyone who got gold on that one. Right at the bottom they are asking for readers to send in their own challenges, and they're particularly keen on ideas for Zelda, Majora's Mask, Mickey Speedway, Rush 2049, and The World Is Not Enough. Fancy getting your challenge in the mag and winning a pin badge? Those were the days. Send your ideas to Game On, N64 Magazine at their Bath address. Simple as that. This page is all about bragging rights, classic N64 style. It's called I'm the Best, and it's showing off top reader scores in various games. They're kicking it off by saying if you think you're good, take a look at what Shiro Powell and Corinna O'Dwyer from London are doing. There's a bit about star performance, talking about Ben Gooch and his Donkey Kong 64 arcade mode score. Apparently he's so good at DK64 he's joking about retiring. 15,000 points ahead of the nearest rival, blimey. They're even sending him a copy of Rush 2049, which is a decent racer from Midway. They're asking for readers to send in their own star performance scores to get featured too. Then there's a new high score section. This month it's Sean Matthews for Majora's Mask. He got a time of 1 minute 16 seconds and 52 hundredths at the Goron races. Majora's Mask, what a game that was. Proper head scratcher. Sean's won a copy of Magical Tetris Challenge, which is a good Tetris spin-off. Gidumink. This month's score to beat is also Majora's Mask. It's the Beavers race at Great Bay Coast. Alan set a time of 46 seconds, 21 hundredths. They want you to send in a video of your attempt to beat it, and the best time wins a mystery game in N64 54ths. Sending in VHS tapes, those were the days. Then there are the track and field high score tables. They've got all sorts of events. 100 meters dash, 100 meters breaststroke, 110 meters hurdles, hammer, triple jump, horizontal bar, trap shooting, 100 meters freestyle, and championship scores. It looks like Mark Dunster and Darren Bolton are doing pretty well across a few events. Names keep popping up. People from London, Lincolnshire, Peterborough, all over getting their names in the mag for being top players. Good on 'em. Classic stuff. This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a regular feature in the mag, asking for help with your gaming woes. It's all presented in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, with Dr. Kit's acting the part of a proper doctor for games. First up, Ori from Wensbury is struggling with the third level of The World Is Not Enough on the N64, remember that? Good Bond game for its time, though maybe a bit clunky now. Dr. Kit's, in his usual style, suggests just shooting blokes from the side, as they have a limited field of vision. Pretty standard advice really, but in a funny way. Then there's Afraz from Derby, asking about Ocarina of Time. Specifically, Nairu's Love and the Golden Scale. Classic game, still holds up, doesn't it? Dr. Kitts tells him where to find Nairu's Love and then gives a slightly cryptic answer about the Golden Scale involving bombs, fairies and fishing. Typical Dr. Kitts. Not exactly straight to the point, is he? Ed from Bexillan Sea is moaning about losing progress in Majora's Mask because he reset time without giving dust to the smithy. Majora's Mask, now that was a strange and wonderful game, wasn't it? The time mechanic was brilliant and stressful all at once. Dr. Kitts uses it as a lesson in time management. Cheeky! Mark from Cardiff is having trouble with the Cyclops in Hercules. Hang on, Hercules on the PlayStation? Bit odd, asking Dr. Kitts about a PlayStation game in an N64 mag. Still, Dr. Kitts tells him to use flying fists, which a villager helpfully hints at. Right then. Finally, Graham from Scotland wants to know how to unlock Maple and Metal Mario in Mario Golf. Mario Golf on the N64 was brilliant, proper pick-up-and-play fun. Dr. Kitts explains the slightly convoluted way to get Golden Mario involving Metal Mario, Left C, and atypical Nintendo secret stuff, eh? Then he lists off how to unlock other characters like Yoshi, Sunny, Wario, Harry and Bowser by beating them in Get Character mode, and Maple and Metal Mario by earning birdie badges in tournament mode. Sounds about right, gotta earn those characters back in the day, not like now where you get everything handed to you on a plate. Overall, a classic Dr. Kitts page, helpful in a roundabout way, and a bit of a laugh. This page is titled Lost in Space, classic N64 mag title. A bit dramatic for a retro feature, eh? It's all about Nintendo classics that the UK might have missed. The article starts by mentioning that Japan always gets Nintendo stuff first, which was always a pain back in the day. They're talking about Super Mario Bros. 2, saying it was originally a non-Mario game repackaged for the US and Europe, but only Japan got the proper sequel, Super Mario Bros. 2. Now with Super Mario Bros. 2 coming to Game Boy Advance, they thought it was time to reveal the biggest twist in the game's tale. Turns out, back in 1995, Nintendo released a Japan-only version of Super Mario Bros. 2. The article then moves on to Satella What? It's about the Satellaview, which was some bonkers Japanese satellite digital audio broadcasting thing by Saint GGA. Bizarre name, right? They launched a satellite called BS4 into space. Initially, it just broadcast radio to Japanese homes, but from 1995 to 1998, it beamed actual SNES games down to Earth. Bandai made a Satellaview device, a chunky cream box, which plugged into the SNES. It picked up the BS4 signals and used BSX broadcast cassettes minus basically memory carts to store downloaded SNES games. Apparently, Japanese gamers could download new SNES titles, including rejigged classics. They even got demos, hints, tips and charts, transmitted daily from 7 PM to 9 PM. They end by saying it's like a 6.4DD for the SNES, which is a fair comparison, both a bit niche and Japan only. The page has some screenshots of pixel art characters, Mario and Yoshi style, very colourful, and pictures of the Satellaview console and cartridges. A grey SNES add-on, not the prettiest thing, is it? It's all a bit obscure really, this Satellaview stuff. Most of us in the UK probably never even heard of it back then. This page is all about lost games for the Satellaview, Nintendo's madcap satellite download service for the SNES, remember that? It's headlined BS Super Mario Bros. USA, which apparently was a souped UP version of Super Mario Bros. 2 from the Japanese Super Mario collection, designed to be played with a radio broadcast soundtrack. Bonkers idea really. The article talks about how timing's everything with this game, thanks to a built-in clock. It mentions the characters from SMB2 were all there, Mario, Luigi, Peach and Toad, but in this BS version they'd force you to switch characters at set times, which sounds a bit of a pain, having to adapt to their different abilities on the fly. Then there's items. Apparently timed events would chuck in helpful objects like invincibility stars and POW blocks. They also talk about enemies being defeated with vegetables like in the original SMB2. Random events were also a thing, like sudden darkness or getting attacked by a fireball-flinging triclide. Sounds like they were really trying to spice things up. There's a talk section discussing the audio, saying it was full of clues in the radio soundtrack, and character faces would pop up on screen and move their mouths as if they were talking. A bit like a puppet show maybe. They mention being confused by a new character with a pointy tash who hasn't shown up in any other Mario game. Pointed highlights how scores were important, with changes made to SMB2 to help players rack up points, like extra Mario statues. They mention 3 levels within each BS Super Mario installment, and a bizarre credit sequence with radio voice artists. Down at the bottom, under Space Oddities, they're teasing more lost Nintendo games. Radical Dreamers is mentioned as text-based sequel to Chrono Trigger and prequel to Chrono Cross on the PlayStation. Interesting, never saw that one. Dr. Mario is there, a 1997 N64 version of the puzzle classic. Wario's Woods is described as a late Satellaview puzzle game, with Little Toad starring apparently awful, according to them. Dragon Quest in Japan was even bigger than Final Fantasy they reckon, and this BS release polished up the original NES version. And finally, Albert Odyssey, described as a moody RPG adventure. Sounds intriguing, maybe something worth digging into if any of these Satellaview games ever surface properly. This page in N64 Magazine dives into some of the more obscure and frankly odd games that were available on the Satellaview, that Japanese-only satellite download service for the Super Famicom. It's titled Lost in Space, which is pretty apt as most of us in the UK never got to experience these. Nilkri. First up is BS The Legend of Zelda. Apparently this was a graphically enhanced version of the original NES Zelda, but you could only play it for an hour at a time, and it had a radio soundtrack with voice acting, which sounds a bit strange for Zelda to be honest. Instead of Link, you played as a generic Satellaview boy or girl, which is a bit of a departure. They even mention Princess Zelda rescued by a very PC lady adventurer, which is a bit of a laugh. Then there's BS Mario Excitebike. It's basically Excitebike but with Mario characters. Nothing too groundbreaking, but it sounds like a decent update on a classic NES game. They talk about bonus minigames in Bike Bonus, mentioning Long Jump and Boo Jump, which sounds like some simple but fun diversions. Next up, Peachy is described, and this sounds rather odd. Apparently if you won in first place in this game, you got a kiss from Princess Peach, or at least an animation of it. Luigi blushing and a Koopa rolling on the floor in sheer pleasure is mentioned. Sounds a bit bizarre, even for Nintendo. There are shorter sections on other Satellaview games. Wrecking Crew 98 is mentioned as an updated version of the NES game with puzzle elements. Yoshi no Panapon is described as similar to Tetris Attack and Pokemon Puzzle League, so another puzzler then. Golf Out is a cute golf game with wooden players and cats, which they say is what Satellaview was made for, a bit of a niche choice there. Courant en Pas is described as an interpretation of Endor Fun, which supposedly uses subliminal messages to trick players into having fun that's a bit weird. Finally, Super Famicom Wars is mentioned as a precursor to modern strategy games where you build armies and conquer rivals. It all sounds rather intriguing and definitely shows a side of Nintendo most of us in the UK never saw back in the day. Satellaview was a strange beast, wasn't it? This page showcases a bunch of Satellaview games, which were a bit of a curiosity back in the day, weren't they? First up is BS F-Zero, which is basically the SNES classic but with all the original tracks plus a new championship mode. Apparently, these new tracks were supposed to be for experts only, and they even slapped some fancy names on the new vehicles like Blue Thunder and Fire Scorpion. It mentions how the tracks hint at the shape of the upcoming GBA F-Zero, which is interesting in hindsight. Dondold. Then there's a rundown of some of the tracks in BS F-Zero. Mute City 4 is described as easily negotiable until you hit a tricky triple jump shortcut. Big Blue 2, they say, is a perilously thin track with 90-degree turns, as scary as the Big Blue in F-Zero X. Sandstorm 1 has a tight spend and a mine-filled section near the end. Silence 2 is full of mines in pairs, and has a single lane split that can lead you straight into a wall. Finally, Sandstorm 2 features more spends and a boost strip right down the middle. Sounds like classic F-Zero chaos, even in bite-sized Satellaview form. Next is BS Mario Bros. 3, a cut-down version of the SNES Super Mario Collection. It was a demo to get people interested in Satellaview, with some changes to fit the time-limited nature of the broadcast, and even some game dialogue soundtracked on St. Tau, GIGA radio. Apparently it was still as fun as the original, even with these changes. The modified Mario section details the differences between BS Mario 3 and the original. The intro has a poor image of the Super Mario Bros. 3 box, and inexplicably, Mario, Peach and Toad are sat around with what looks like radio microphones, with Daisy just hanging out there too. Odd. The map is different as all levels are available from the start, but the route to the boss is locked until 50 minutes have passed. There's also a puzzle game, after defeating a boss in a level, a mix and match item game, but apparently not that exciting. Lastly, the event section mentions Toad's Mushroom House, which was in the original SMB3, but here it's badly decorated, with simple text and some basic treasure chests. Sounds a bit bare bones, really. Fawasts. Then we move on to other Satellaview titles. Dynami Tracer is described as a very strange RPG from Square, the Final Fantasy people, involving racing between planets and chatting to locals. Adult Planet is mentioned, which is a bit eyebrow-raising, isn't it? Kirby Banco Baseball is a disappointing, primitive take on baseball starring Kirby. Paneru Dupont 98 is yet another Satellaview version of Tetris Attack, but with Yoshi swapped out for some girl and her goofy bird mates. Treasure Conflicts is another Squaresoft oddity with airships, treasure, and a dog, but apparently not up to Square's usual standard for RPGs. Finally, Arkanoid Do It Again is a laughably late version of Arkanoid, or Pong really, based on an old coin-op, but at least it has nice animated backgrounds apparently. A mixed bag of games on this page then, some interesting curiosities, and some definite duds by the sounds of it. This page in N64 Magazine is hyping up what's coming in the next issue. Big focus on Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was a pretty big deal back then, especially for the N64, proper adult humor finally hitting Nintendo. They're promising every shocking detail revealed. Magazines always say that, don't they? But we were all well up for any info on Conker at the time, that's for sure. Below that, they've got a section on Pokemon Gold and Silver. Monster review and heaps of hints to get you started, it says. Gold and Silver were massive on the Game Boy Color, everyone was playing them, proper handheld classics they were. Pichu and Teddiursa are on there too, cute little things, alongside some screenshots of the games themselves, all good stuff. This page is the reviews section, issue 53. Looks like they're tipping Sin and Punishment, which was quite the import title back then, wasn't it? They're promising tips if you manage to snag yourself a copy. Right then, reviews of all these games, it says. And we've got Paper Mario, Scooby-Doo, Mega Man 64, Backstage Assault, Super Bowling, and Custom Robo V2. Paper Mario, cracking game that, proper RPG, on the N64. Bit different for Mario, but it really worked. Scooby-Doo, well you know what you're getting with those games, probably something for the younger gamers. Mega Man 64, that was the 3D Mega Man, wasn't half bad if I remember rightly. Backstage Assault, that wrestling game, seemed alright, a bit different from your usual WWF games. Super Bowling, yeah, bowling game, pretty standard stuff. And Custom Robo V2, that was the sequel to the Robot Battler, some people were really into that. Kurinka. Looks like they are promising absolutely free stuff, a book rammed with tips for two of the N64's biggest games. Blimey, must be a decent pull if it's free. Kurinka. Then there's the usual Guff Skill Club Millennium latest results, loads of new tips and cheats, special investigations, GameCube and GBA news, all the stuff we were wanting to hear about back then, especially the GameCube hype building up, and of course, the only reviews you can trust. Bit cheeky that, but you gotta be confident I suppose. Next month in Planet Game Boy they're looking at Mickey's Speedway, USA, Hello Kitty, Mr. Driller, and Pocket Soccer. Decent Game Boy lineup, something for everyone there I guess. March 2001, yeah, feels about right. Page 97. Right then, let's see what else they've got.